Ethan Kahn opened his eyes and saw a crack. Not a small one, not just a cosmetic one. The crack ran across the entire ceiling of his kitchen and pulsed with a pale, pearlescent light. Something small and warm was crawling across his chest. He looked down. A turtle the size of his palm was perched on his ribs, staring at him like that, as if it were waiting. As if it had been waiting for a very long time. Somewhere beyond the apartment walls, a siren wailed. Not a fire siren, not a police siren. Ethan had never heard a sound like that in his life. The sound was like the scream of something enormous, something that shouldn't exist. The chandelier above his head swayed. The glass in the window shattered with a soft pop, and the turtle on his chest grew hot, almost scorching hot. And then a voice rang out inside his head, tired, ancient, calm. The voice said it was time to get up. The voice said the refrigerator would be a good place to start. Ethan sat up. His head was spinning. He remembered. A week ago, he'd walked into a small Korean pet store on the corner of Pine Street to buy cat food. The cat was old and mean and would eat only one kind of food that cost $12. A turtle was sitting on the display shelf between bags of cat litter, white on the underside, round, with a crack in its shell patched with a Chinese band-aid covered in hieroglyphs. Ethan looked at her, she looked at him, and he heard a voice for the first time. The voice said that if Ethan took her home, she would make up for everything. Ethan paid $8. He brought her home in an apple box. He named her Mochi because she was round, white, and suspiciously silent. The cat sniffed her once and went to sleep on the windowsill. Mochi sat in the box and said nothing for 7 days. And then the sky cracked. Ethan stood up. His legs wouldn't hold him. He grabbed the edge of the table and looked out the window, or rather at the spot where the window used to be. The glass was gone. Beyond the window frame lay a view of the Seattle suburbs. But this wasn't the same suburb Ethan had seen yesterday. The sky above the city was split open. A vertical crack ran from the horizon to the zenith. Black, pulsating. Something was pouring out of it. Tiny dots, dozens, hundreds. They fell onto the roofs of houses, and the roofs caved in, as if the concrete were softer than bread. One of the dots fell onto the supermarket parking lot across the street. The asphalt splattered in all directions like water. The dot turned around. It had limbs, 6 of them, and a mouth. Ethan stepped back from the window. Mocha was sitting on the floor, staring at him. A voice in his head said they didn't have much time. It said they needed to eat something small to start with. Ethan looked at the refrigerator, small, noisy, full of expired sauce and 3 cans of beer. He walked over to the fridge. He placed his palm on the door. Mochi opened her mouth. The fridge vanished. It just vanished. Without a sound, without a flash. It was there and then it wasn't. A tiny bulge appeared on Mochi's armor, about the size of a matchbox. Ethan crouched down. He looked at the bulge. He looked at the empty space where the fridge had stood. And he thought that panic was poor resource management. He's a logistics engineer. He spent 3 years optimizing workflow at Costco. He knows what to do when the system breaks down. First, take inventory, then prioritize, then take action. He picked up Mochi. She was warm and heavier than yesterday. He tucked her into his shirt. It settled in there as if it had done this 1,000 times. A voice in his head said, "Thank you." Ethan didn't reply. He went to pack his backpack. The power went out an hour later. Ethan had managed to charge his phone to 60%. There was no signal, no cell service, no Wi-Fi. The screen showed the network search icon and nothing else. The cat sat on the windowsill and looked down at the creatures below with an expression of utter contempt. Ethan packed everything he could find into his backpack. 2 bottles of water, a flashlight, a multi-tool, a first aid kit from the bathroom, 3 energy bars, a charging cable that was now useless, a birth certificate. He didn't know why he'd taken the birth certificate. His hand just reached for it on its own. Then he looked at the cat. The cat's name was Countess. She was 14 years old. She hated all people except Ethan, and even that wasn't certain. Ethan picked up the carrier. Countess hissed, but climbed inside. The cat under his arm stirred. A voice said the cat smelled of discontent. Ethan said aloud that this, her normal state. He stepped out into the hallway. The hallway was empty. The light was off. It smelled of dust and something sour. Crying could be heard from the apartment across the hall. Ethan stopped. He stood there for a moment. He knocked. No one answered. The crying continued. He jiggled the doorknob. It was locked. He stood there for another 3 seconds. Then he walked on. Because the door was locked and he didn't have a tool to pry it open, he memorized the apartment number, 412. He promised himself he'd come back. He didn't come back. That was the first of many things Ethan promised to do, but didn't during his first week. It took him 4 minutes to walk down the stairs. 5th floor. 4th. On the 3rd floor, a man was lying there. A man. About 50 years old. Motionless. Ethan checked his pulse. There was no pulse. He stepped over the body and kept going. The Countess in the carrier was silent. The bottle of urine tucked under her arm lay still. On the 2nd floor, the entrance door had been smashed in. Ethan peered outside. The parking lot in front of the building looked like it had been bombed. 3 cars were overturned. The asphalt was torn up in strips, as if something enormous had dragged its claws across the ground. There were no creatures in sight, but Ethan heard sounds. In the distance, a screech, a crunch, something like laughter but not human. He clutched the carrier close to him. He adjusted Mochi under his arm, and he ran. Not toward the car. The car was parked in the yard, and it had no windshield. He ran toward the 7-Eleven across the street, because 7-Eleven means food, water, walls, a roof. And for a logistics engineer, the first item on the plan is always the same: secure the base. The store had been ransacked. The door was torn off its hinges. Some of the shelves were overturned, but the walls were still standing. The roof was intact, and on the floor, amid scattered bags of chips and a puddle of soda, sat a little girl. About 6, maybe 7. She was hugging a juice box and wasn't crying. She had huge eyes and a dirty face. She looked at Ethan like that. The way someone looks who's been waiting for 3 days for someone to come. Ethan froze. Grafina hissed from her carrier. Mocha stirred. The girl said one word. She said her name was Lily. Ethan set the carrier down on the floor. He crouched down in front of her, and he said his name was Ethan, and that he had a turtle and a cat. Lily looked at him, then at the carrier, from which the Countess's angry snout was sticking out, then back at Ethan. And she nodded, as if that were enough. Ethan looked around. 7-Eleven. The sales floor was about 90 square meters. The back room was another 20. He started counting. Water, 14 bottles on the shelves. Another box in the back room. Food, potato chips, energy bars, 8 cans of beans. The hot dogs in the display case had already gone bad. Medications, aspirin, Band-Aids, antiseptic. Up on the roof, he remembered that this chain had a standard setup: 2 solar panels for emergency lighting. He climbed onto the roof using the fire escape ladder in the back. The panels were in place, intact, plugged in. He went back downstairs. He turned on the cash register. A small screen lit up. Lily looked at him as if he were a magician. Ethan said it wasn't magic, but proper infrastructure. They held out in the store until evening. Then the others came. Not just one, a pack. 5 creatures the size of a large dog. Pale, eyeless, with jaws that opened far too wide. They moved slowly across the parking lot, sniffing around. Ethan stood by the window and counted. 5 of them. Their speed was about 10 kilometers per hour. The distance to the store was 40 meters. He had 4 minutes. Other survivors in this situation have 2 options: fight or run. Ethan had no weapon, and he was with a child and a cat, so he chose a third option. He placed his palm on the store wall. In his mind, he outlined the boundaries: walls, floor, ceiling, the paneled roof, the back room, everything. He looked at Mochi. Mochi looked at him. A voice in his head told him she was ready. Ethan told her out loud that she was a smart girl. Mochi opened her mouth. The store vanished. All of it. Entirely. Along with them inside. Outside in the parking lot, there was nothing left but an empty patch of bare concrete and 5 creatures that stopped and began turning their eyeless heads, searching. They didn't find anything. All they saw was empty asphalt and a small turtle the size of a refrigerator slowly crawling away. Inside the shell, it was quiet and warm. The store was still standing. The shelves, the cash register, the glowing screen. The solar panels on the roof were somehow still working. Lily was sitting on the floor, still hugging the juice carton. The Countess climbed out of her carrier and settled down on the counter. Ethan stood in the middle of the sales floor and did what he did best, taking inventory. 340 items, 89 past their expiration dates. But in the apocalypse, an expiration date is a recommendation, not a death sentence. He looked at Mochi. She was sitting on the floor and looked content. He'd promised her grapes that evening. Lily, who hadn't spoken in 3 days, suddenly asked quietly. She asked if she could have the grapes first. Ethan looked at her, then at the fruit shelf. He found a bunch of grapes, still fresh. He opened it. He gave half to Lily. He placed the other half in front of Mochi. He sat down on the floor next to them. The Countess jumped down from the counter and lay down on his lap. Outside, the world was coming to an end. Inside the turtle's shell, 3 living creatures were eating grapes, and the 4th was sleeping on the lap of a man who, until yesterday, had lived the most boring life on Earth. And Tan took a notebook out of his backpack. He opened the first page. He wrote at the top, Fortress Journal, Day 1, Assets, 1 store, 14 bottles of water, 1 logistics engineer, 1 girl, 1 cat, 1 turtle of unknown origin. Status, alive, forecast, uncertain, but we have grapes. The first night inside the shell was strange. Ethan lay on the floor of the 7-Eleven and stared at the ceiling. The ceiling was the same as always. Tiles, fluorescent lights. One of them was flickering, but there was no sky beyond the ceiling. Beyond the ceiling was the shell. Ethan could feel it. He couldn't see it. He didn't hear it. He felt it. As if the space around the store were enclosed in something dense and warm. Lily was sleeping on an air mattress from the picnic supplies section. The Countess was sleeping at her feet. Mocha was sitting on the counter, wide awake. She was staring at a single point. The voice in his head was silent. Ethan lay there and thought. He thought about 3 things. First, the shell's capacity. Mochi had devoured the refrigerator and then the entire store. The refrigerator had barely affected her. The store had made her noticeably larger. So there's a limit. The voice had said something about 3 buildings, but Ethan wasn't sure. He needed to check. Second, movement. Outside, Mochi was crawling slowly, like a regular turtle, only the size of a refrigerator. By his rough estimate, its speed was about 2 kilometers per hour. That's very slow. If they were chased, it wouldn't get away. Third, Soyeon, his younger sister. She was in Portland, on the university campus, 300 kilometers south, 4 hours by car in normal traffic. At a speed of 2 kilometers per hour, that's a little over 6 days of nonstop travel. If the roads are clear, the roads aren't clear. Ethan closed his eyes. Opened them, stood up, went to check their supplies again. Because when you can't influence the situation, you at least need to know exactly what you have. Morning arrived, sort of. Inside the shell, there was no distinction between day and night. Ethan set the alarm on his phone. 6 a.m. battery at 38%. He woke Lily up. He gave her a peanut butter bar and a bottle of water. She ate in silence, neatly. She didn't drop a single crumb. Ethan noticed this and thought that this little girl had already learned not to waste food. 3 days alone in a ransacked store. She was 6 years old. He asked her where her parents were. Lily stopped chewing. She looked at the floor. She said her mom had gone to get water and hadn't come back. She said it had been a long time ago. Ethan didn't ask how long ago. For a 6-year-old, 3 days is a lifetime. He told her she was with him now. Lily nodded. She went back to eating her candy bar. The cat walked over and nuzzled her hand with its head. Lily stroked the cat and almost smiled for a second. Ethan turned away. He needed to get outside. He needed to figure out where they were and where to go. Exiting the shell was simple, as Ethan thought he wanted to go outside. Mochi opened her mouth. Ethan stepped into the darkness and found himself on the street. Early morning, a gray sky. The crack in the sky hadn't gone anywhere, but now it was dim, almost imperceptible. Mochi stood on the sidewalk, the size of a large refrigerator. The shell was smooth, white with gray spots. A crack, patched with a Band-Aid, ran from one edge to the other. Ethan looked around. They were on the outskirts of a residential neighborhood. Single-story houses, front yards, wrecked cars, silence, no sirens, no screams, no creatures, not yet. He pulled a map of Seattle out of his backpack, a paper one. He always kept a paper map in the glove compartment of his car, a habit he'd picked up from his father. His father used to say that electronics break down, but paper doesn't. His father was right. Ethan unfolded the map on Mochi's shell. She glanced at him, but didn't protest. He determined their approximate location, the Burien area, South Seattle, about 8 kilometers east of the I-5 on-ramp. If he took the highway south, it was 300 kilometers to Portland, but the highway would be jammed with cars and creatures. He needed a different route. He began to think. Mochi's voice came softly. She said she sensed a building 2 blocks to the west, a building with medicine. Ethan asked her how she sensed it. Mochi replied that she just did. Like how people smell food, Ethan thought. Medicine. Most likely a pharmacy. A pharmacy is the second priority after food and water. He already has a store. The pharmacy would be the second building out of 3 possible ones. He went back inside. He told Lily they were going for a walk. Lily looked at him seriously and asked if those animals would be there. Ethan said that if they were, Mochi would hide them. Lily nodded. She picked up her little backpack, which held her juice carton. It was empty, but she hadn't thrown it away. Ethan had left the Countess inside the shell. The Countess didn't mind. She found a patch of light from the solar panel on the floor and lay down in it. 2 blocks west along the empty streets. Ethan carried Mochi in his arms. She had gotten heavier, about 3 kilograms. Lily walked beside him, holding onto his jacket. They walked quietly. Ethan listened. The city was dead, not completely destroyed, just empty. Houses stood. Cars stood. There were no people. Here and there were signs of damage, scratches on the walls, dents in the doors, dark spots on the asphalt that Ethan tried not to think about. On the corner of the second block stood a pharmacy, a small one, a standalone building. The sign was dented, but the walls were intact. The door was locked. The windows were intact. Ethan approached. He peered through the glass. The shelves were in place, merchandise on the shelves. No signs of destruction, as if everyone had simply left and locked the door. He tried the doorknob. Locked. He looked at Mochi. Mochi looked at him. A voice said they could eat it. Ethan set Mochi down on the ground. He placed his palm on the pharmacy wall. He closed his eyes. Mentally, he outlined the boundaries. The walls, the roof, the floor, the foundation, the back room, everything inside. Mochi opened her mouth. The drugstore vanished. In its place was a flat patch of ground. Mochi grew even bigger. Now she was the size of a small car. Ethan couldn't lift her anymore. Lily watched this with her mouth agape. Then she said that the turtle had gotten bigger. Ethan said it was because she was eating well. Lily accepted that explanation. Ethan stepped inside the shell. Now there were 2 rooms inside, a 7-Eleven and a pharmacy. Between them was a door, an ordinary door that hadn't been there before. Ethan opened it and walked from the store into the pharmacy, 2 steps. From the sales floor with chips and soda to a sterile room with white shelves and medicines. He began taking inventory. Antibiotics, painkillers, bandages, antiseptics, fever reducers, insulin in the refrigerator, which was powered by some internal energy source within the armor. Ethan didn't understand the physics of this place, but he understood the logistics. He now had 2 out of 3 buildings, food and medicine. He had to use the 3rd slot wisely. They were heading south. We crept through the empty streets, slowly, 2 kilometers per hour. Ethan walked alongside it. Lily sat on top of the shell. She liked sitting on the shell. She said it was like riding a very slow and very large elephant. Ethan didn't argue. They avoided the main roads. Ethan led Mochi through alleys and backyards. They saw the creatures twice the first time, just one, a big one the size of a horse. It was standing at an intersection and didn't move. It just stood there. Ethan led Mochi around it, taking a detour 2 blocks away. The creature didn't budge. The second time, they saw a pack of 3 small creatures devouring something in a shopping center parking lot. Ethan didn't look to see what it was. They walked past at a distance of 200 meters. The creatures didn't notice them, or they weren't interested. Mochi said that the small others react to fear. If you're not afraid, they don't see you, Ethan asked. What if you are afraid? Mochi paused and said it was better not to be afraid. By evening, they'd walked 4 kilometers. Ethan was exhausted. Lily was sleeping on the exosuit. Mochi moved steadily, showing no signs of fatigue. They stopped in an alley behind an auto repair shop. Ethan looked at the shop. He thought about it. No, the repair shop wasn't a priority. He needed to figure out a place to stay, or water, or weapons. He'd saved the 3rd slot. He went inside the armored vehicle. He made dinner out of canned beans and chips. Lily ate in silence. Then she asked where they were going. Ethan said south. Lily asked why. Ethan said his sister was there. Lily thought for a moment and asked if his sister was kind. Ethan said yes. Very. Lily said that in that case, she wanted to go south too. Mocha was lying on the counter eating grapes. The Countess was sleeping on a shelf between bags of cookies. Ethan opened his journal. Day 2. Supplies, 2 buildings. A store and a pharmacy, 14 bottles of water minus 3, a 10-day food supply if used sparingly, a full set of medications. Crew, 1 engineer, 1 girl, 1 cat, 1 turtle. Travel speed, 2 kilometers per hour. Distance to destination, 297 kilometers. Estimated time of arrival. He did the math. 6 days of non-stop travel, 12 days with stops to sleep. Longer if they have to take detours. Longer if there are problems. There will be problems. Outlook, difficult but doable. We have beans. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He went outside. He sat down on Mochi's armor. He looked up at the sky. On the 3rd day, they found a coffee kiosk, small, freestanding, in the parking lot of a burned-down shopping center. Ethan stood in front of it and realized it was a bad decision. The 3rd slot in the armor, the last one. He should have spent it on something useful, on a generator, on weapons, on fortifications. But standing before him was a coffee kiosk with a surviving coffee machine and bags of beans on the shelf. And Ethan Kahn, 26 years old, a logistics engineer who had drunk coffee every morning without fail for 3 years in a row, looked at that kiosk and said aloud to Mochi that he knew it was stupid. Mochi looked at him. A voice in his head said that silly wasn't a strong enough word to describe this decision. Ethan said he knew, and so what? Mochi was silent for a moment. Then the voice said she liked the smell of coffee. Ethan placed his palm on the kiosk's wall. Mochi ate him. The 3rd slot was filled, capacity exhausted. Now there were 3 rooms inside the shell, a store, a pharmacy, a coffee kiosk, connected by doors that hadn't existed before. Ethan brewed some coffee, his first cup in 4 days. He stood in the tiny kiosk inside the shell of a giant turtle in the parking lot of a burned-down shopping mall in a world where the sky had cracked, and drank coffee. He thought it was the best coffee of his life. Lily asked for hot chocolate. Ethan found a packet of hot chocolate powder. He made her some hot chocolate. The Countess sniffed the coffee and sneezed. Mocha got some grapes. Everyone was happy. Ethan wrote in his journal, Day 3. Strategic decision number 1. Spent the last slot on a coffee kiosk. ROI negative, morale positive. Compromise accepted. They moved along the outskirts. Ethan led Mochi parallel to I-5, but not on it. The highway was a dead zone. He could see it from a hill, hundreds of cars, thousands stuck, abandoned, some overturned. The others roamed among them. Not many, but enough to keep you from venturing in there with a turtle that crawls at a pedestrian's pace. Ethan steered the fortress along parallel roads, residential streets, industrial zones, back alleys, slowly but safely. Lily sat on the shell and counted the houses. She said this house was sad, that one was angry, and this one was sleeping. Ethan didn't understand her classification, but he didn't interfere. It was her system. She needed a system. Everyone needs a system when the world is falling apart. On the fifth day, they encountered people. A group of 4, 2 men, a woman, a teenager about 14. They were standing on the side of a country road, watching the approaching Mochi with an expression Ethan had already learned to recognize. Fear mixed with hope, mixed with distrust. One of the men was holding a baseball bat. The woman was clutching the teenager close to her. Ethan stopped Mochi. He climbed down from her shell. He raised his hands to show he was unarmed. The man with the bat asked what kind of creature it was. Ethan said it wasn't a creature, but a turtle. The man asked why it was the size of a car. Ethan said it was well fed. The man didn't laugh. The woman asked if he had any water. Ethan looked at her, at the teenager, at the second man, whose arm was hanging at an odd angle. A fracture. He went back into the shell. He brought out 4 bottles of water, a pack of bandages, a splint from the pharmacy. The man with the bat was staring at him. Ethan said they had a pharmacy inside. The man asked, "Inside what?" Ethan pointed at Mochi. The man looked at the turtle, at Ethan, back at the turtle. He said Ethan had lost his mind. Ethan said maybe, buddy, apply the splint. He went inside the shell with the man who had the fracture. A woman followed them. A teenager, too. The man with the bat stayed outside. Ethan treated the fracture in the pharmacy. He had no medical training, but he'd taken a first aid course at the warehouse. A splint, a bandage, painkillers. The man gritted his teeth and didn't scream. The woman stood nearby and cried quietly. She wasn't crying because of the man's pain. She was crying because someone had helped them. Ethan realized this later. He gave them food, water, a supply of bandages. He told them that if they headed south along the parallel roads, 20 kilometers away, they'd find the small town of Tacoma. Maybe there were survivors there. Maybe there were fortifications. The man with the bat went inside to take a look. He stood there for a moment. He looked at the 7-Eleven shelves, at the pharmacy behind the door, at the coffee kiosk. He said that Ethan was crazy, but a good kind of crazy. They headed south. Ethan watched them go. Lily stood next to him and watched too. She asked why he hadn't taken them with him. Ethan remained silent. He didn't know the answer. Or maybe he did, but couldn't bring himself to say it. Because the answer was this. Because it's cramped inside. Because there's food for 10 days and there will be 8 of them. Because he isn't ready to be responsible for 6 people. He wrote it down in the log. Day 5. Made contact with survivors. Provided assistance. The group continued on their own. Supplies used: 4 bottles of water, bandages, a splint, 1 pack of painkillers. Note in the margins. At what point does refusing to help become a decision to kill? Day 6. Changed everything. They were walking along a bypass road next to the forest. When Mochi stopped, she stood up. Ethan asked what had happened. The voice in his head was tense. Mochi said there were people ahead, lots of them, and they weren't friendly. Ethan grabbed Lily and quickly ducked into the armor. 5 minutes later, 3 figures appeared on the road. Motorcycles, leather jackets, weapons. One had a shotgun. The second had a machete. The third had something on his shoulder, something alive, small, black, a bird, a raven. The raven was perched on the third man's shoulder and was looking at Mochi. The third man was young, about 35, fit, neat haircut, the kind of face that smiles easily. He was smiling. He got off his motorcycle. He walked over to Mochi. He tapped her shell. He said he'd heard about her, that rumors travel fast, even in the dead world, that a turtle that eats at home is interesting news. He introduced himself. Kim Jae-wook. Ethan knew that name. Not personally, but during their 3-day journey south, he'd heard it twice from a group of refugees he'd helped. They'd been talking about the Scavengers, a gang that robs survivors, takes their supplies, and takes people. The gang's leader is the Summoner. His beast is a raven. The raven marks its victims. All the others within a kilometer's radius can see the marked one. The marked one dies within a day. Always. Jae-wook stood in front of the shell and smiled. He said he had a proposal, a simple one. Ethan hands over the turtle. Jaewook doesn't mark him or the child. They go their separate ways. Everyone is alive. He said it calmly, as if he were proposing a real estate deal because before the rift, he had been a real estate agent. Ethan didn't sleep the night after meeting Jae-wook. He sat in a coffee kiosk inside the shell, drinking his third cup of coffee and sketching diagrams on napkins. The problem was simple. He had no combat force. Mochi could devour buildings but couldn't fight. He himself didn't know how to fight. Lily was a child. The Countess was a cat. If the scavengers came with a numerical advantage and weapons, the only strategy was to flee. But Mochi moved at a speed of 2 kilometers per hour. The scavengers' motorcycles moved at 60. The numbers didn't add up. Ethan looked at his diagrams and thought. Mochi's voice came softly. She said she could go faster. Ethan looked up. He asked how much faster? Mochi said that if she tucked in her limbs and rolled, she'd be faster. But not by much, maybe 4 kilometers per hour. Ethan thought, 4 instead of 2, still not enough. He asked if there was another way. Mochi paused. Then she said that if he found a building with wheels, she could eat it and use it. Ethan stared at the wall. A building with wheels? That's not a building, that's a vehicle. But Mochi only eats buildings. Or, he asked, Mochi, could she eat a big bus or a truck? Something that could be considered a mobile building. Mochi thought for a moment. The voice in her head sounded uncertain. She said she didn't know. She'd never tried it. But the problem was something else. All 3 of her slots were full. To eat something new, she'd first have to spit out one of the 3 buildings. Ethan looked at his 3 buildings, a grocery store, a pharmacy, a coffee kiosk. The choice was obvious and painful. He finished his coffee, the last cup from that machine. He brewed another one, hot chocolate for Lily, a double espresso for himself. He stood in the kiosk, ran his hand over the counter, sighed, told Mochi he was ready. In the morning, they found a school bus, yellow. It was parked in the high school parking lot 2 kilometers to the south. Intact, tires inflated, gas tank half full. Ethan walked around it 3 times. He inspected the undercarriage. He checked the engine. Everything was working. The bus wouldn't start because the electronics had died at the moment of the rift. But mechanically, it was fine. Ethan went back to Mochi. He told her to spit out the coffee kiosk. Mochi opened her mouth. The coffee kiosk appeared in the parking lot next to the bus, intact, with a coffee machine inside. Ethan looked at it for a second. Then he told Mochi to try eating the bus. Mochi walked over to the bus. She sniffed it. The voice in her head sounded doubtful. She said it wasn't a building. Ethan said it was a mobile shelter for 30 children with a roof, walls, and a door. Mochi thought for a moment. Then she opened her mouth. The bus vanished. Mochi froze. Ethan waited. 5 seconds. 10. Mochi stirred. The voice said it had worked, but it was strange. Inside the shell, the bus existed not as a building, but as... She searched for the word, a mechanism. Ethan stepped inside. The bus was there. Seats, steering wheel, windows. But it was connected to something. When Ethan got behind the wheel and turned the key, the engine started, but Mochi said that fuel didn't matter. The bus now ran on her energy. Ethan pressed the gas pedal. The bus drove off, inside the shell. But at the same time, Mochi was moving on the outside too. Faster. Much faster. 20 kilometers per hour. Ethan burst out laughing for the first time in a week. Lily was sitting in the front seat of the bus, squealing with delight. The Countess dug her claws into the seat upholstery and looked offended. Mochi in his head said it tickled. 20 kilometers per hour. That changed everything. Ethan could now cover 50 kilometers a day if he drove for 10 hours. It was 5 to 6 days. But something else was more important. He could escape the scavengers. Not forever, but he could. He drove all day, along country roads, on the outskirts of dead towns, past gas stations and farms and schools, past a world that had ended a week ago and hadn't yet realized it was over. Lily sat in the front seat and looked out the bus window. The bus window didn't look out onto the road, but into the interior of the armor. But somehow, You could still see what was outside through it, as if the armor were translucent from the inside. Lily was counting cows. She counted 3. All 3 were dead. She stopped counting the cows. Ethan was driving the bus and thinking. He was thinking about how he'd lost the coffee kiosk but gained mobility. He was thinking that it was a fair trade. He was thinking that fair trades are always painful. He was thinking about Jae-wook and his promise to return. He was thinking about So-yeon. He thought about how he needed one more slot in his armor. Mochi said that the capacity could increase. Ethan asked how. Mochi said she didn't know exactly. Something to do with growth, with experience, with responsibility. She couldn't explain it any better. Ethan accepted this as a working hypothesis. The capacity grows as Mochi grows. Mochi is growing. From what? It's unclear. Data is needed. On the 8th day after the rift, they stumbled upon a small county hospital. A 2-story building, white walls, a red cross on the roof. Ethan stopped Mochi 300 meters away and went to scout the area on foot. The hospital stood on the outskirts of a small town. The town was deserted. Signs of destruction, signs of an evacuation, abandoned cars with their doors open, belongings scattered about. But the hospital looked different. The windows were boarded up. On the roof was a makeshift flag made from a white sheet with a red cross painted on it. Someone was inside. Someone had barricaded themselves in and stayed. Ethan approached the door. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. A voice from behind the door. A woman's, sharp. The voice told him to get lost. Ethan said he wasn't a looter. The voice said everyone says that. Ethan said he had medicine. Silence, a long one. Then the lock clicked. The door opened just enough to let the chain through. A face appeared in the crack. A woman, about 29 years old. Dark hair pulled back into a bun. Dark circles under her eyes. Chapped lips. A medical gown stained with something brown. A scalpel in her hand. She looked at Ethan. She said that if he was lying about the medicine, she'd stab him in the femoral artery with the scalpel, and he'd bleed out in 4 minutes. Ethan said he had a whole pharmacy, literally an entire pharmacy, inside a turtle. The woman looked at him like that. The way you look at someone who's just said something so absurd that it might actually be true. She said her name was Hannah Jenkins and that she had 12 patients and not a single syringe of morphine. Ethan said he had morphine in the pharmacy inside a turtle. Hannah opened the door. The hospital inside was a living hell. 12 patients, broken bones, burns, bites, 2 gunshot wounds, 1 child with a fever. Hannah was alone. 1 trauma nurse for 12 patients. No electricity, no proper medication, no help. 8 days. She hadn't slept in over a day. Ethan could tell by the way she moved. Precise, polished, but with that microscopic hesitation that appears when the body is running on its last reserves. He asked what had happened to the rest of the staff. Hannah said the doctor had left to seek help on the first day and hadn't returned. The second nurse had her throat slit by looters on the 3rd day. She was alone. Ethan remained silent. Then he said he had medicine in a pharmacy and that he could bring everything right here. Hannah asked how. Ethan said she'd better go and take a look. They went outside. Ethan brought Mochi over. Hannah looked at the turtle the size of a car. She looked at Ethan. She asked if it was his turtle. Ethan said yes. Hannah asked if she could go inside. Ethan led her into the shell, through the bus to 7-Eleven, and through the door into the pharmacy. Hannah stood in the pharmacy and looked at the shelves, at the antibiotics, at the painkillers, at the packaged syringes, at the morphine. She looked for 15 seconds. Then she sat down on the floor and covered her face with her hands. She wasn't crying. She just sat there and breathed. For the first time in 8 days, she exhaled. Ethan stood nearby and said nothing. He didn't know what to say, but he knew what to do. He began carrying out the medications. He carried medications for 3 hours. Hannah worked. She set up ivuras, changed bandages, administered antibiotics. Ethan helped. He carried things. He handed things over. He held patients. A man with burns stopped moaning for the first time in a week after receiving morphine. A child with a fever was given an antipyretic and fell asleep. Hannah worked in silence, precisely, without a single unnecessary movement. Ethan looked at her and saw what an engineer sees in a well-functioning system: efficiency. He asked her if she wanted coffee. Hannah paused. She turned to him. She looked at him as if he'd asked if she wanted to fly to the moon. She said that if he was joking, she'd hit him. Ethan said he wasn't joking, that he had a whole coffee stand. No, he didn't have a coffee stand. He'd traded it for a bus. He said he had some leftover coffee from the store. Instant. Hannah said she'd drink anything. Ethan made her some coffee. Instant. In a plastic cup. Hannah took the cup with both hands. She took a sip. She closed her eyes. She stood like that for 10 seconds. Then she opened her eyes and said he was crazy. Ethan agreed. Hannah asked if he had a plan. Ethan said he had a turtle, a degree in logistics, and a destination: south. Hannah asked why to the south. Ethan said his sister was in Portland. Hannah finished her coffee. She looked at her 12 patients. She looked at Ethan. She said she had a plan, too. Her plan was to keep her patients from dying. Ethan looked at the hospital, at the 12 people, at the walls, at the generator in the courtyard that wasn't working, at the roof with the homemade flag, and he understood. He understood what he should have understood on the 5th day when he let the group of survivors go. You can't just walk away. It doesn't work. You can hand over 4 bottles of water and leave thinking you've done enough. But that's not enough. Enough means taking responsibility fully. He looked at Mochi. Mochi looked at him. A voice in his head told him she agreed. Ethan asked aloud if Mochi could accommodate the 4th building. Mochi replied that she'd try. Ethan placed his palm on the hospital wall. Mochi tensed. Her armor hummed. Ethan felt resistance, as if something were blocking him, as if the space were refusing to expand. Mochi said it hurt. Ethan pulled his hand away. He said not to do it. Mochi said, "Wait." She fell silent. 10 seconds. 20. Then she opened her mouth. The hospital began to disappear. Slowly, not instantly like before, but slowly. The walls, ceilings, floors, patients in their beds, Hannah standing inside, everything vanished into the shell. Mochi grew. She became the size of a van. She stood where the hospital had just been and breathed heavily. A voice in her head said that her capacity was now 4, but she needed to sleep. 24 hours, at least. Ethan said she was smart. Mochi said grapes. Ethan promised grapes. Mochi slept for 26 hours. The fortress stood motionless on the empty lot where the hospital used to be. On the outside, it was a shell the size of a van. Inside, a whole world. Ethan walked through the hallways, getting used to the new layout. From the bus, a door led to 7-Eleven. From 7-Eleven, a door led to the pharmacy. From the pharmacy, a door led to the hospital. The hospital had been 2 stories tall, and inside the shell, it remained 2 stories tall. A staircase. Patient rooms. The doctor's office. Ethan went up to the 2nd floor and found a window there. The window looked out. Through it, he could see an empty street and a gray sky. It was a vantage point. Every window in the building inside the shell served as a vantage point. He recorded this in the log. Hannah wasn't sitting idle. While Mochi slept, Hannah organized the hospital. She assigned patients to their wards. The seriously ill were on the 1st floor, closer to the pharmacy. The less seriously ill were on the 2nd floor. She put the child with a fever in a separate ward. The fever subsided 6 hours after the antibiotics. Hannah worked nonstop. Ethan suggested she get some sleep. She said she'd sleep once everyone was stable. Ethan pointed out that it had been 12 hours already. She replied, "Y'all, just 1 more hour." 3 hours passed. Ethan made her some coffee. Instant. He brought it into the room. Hannah was standing over a patient with burns, changing his bandage. Ethan set the cup on the nightstand nearby. He didn't say anything. He left. 10 minutes later, Hannah found the cup. It was hot. She picked it up. She took a sip. She glanced toward the door through which Ethan had left. She couldn't remember the last time someone had brought her coffee. Not when she'd asked for it. Just like that. She finished her coffee and finally went to sleep. She slept for 8 hours, for the first time in 9 days. Lily found a spot for herself. She chose the residence lounge on the 2nd floor of the hospital. There was a couch and a window from which she could see the sky. She sat on the couch and drew. Ethan had found her some paper and pencils in the store's back room. She was drawing a turtle. A big one, with houses on its back. Ethan looked at the drawing and thought that for a 6-year-old, it was a very accurate understanding of the situation. Countess explored the hospital and found a windowsill with the widest beam of light. She lay down on it and purred for the first time since the rift. One of the patients, an old man with a broken hip, asked Ethan to bring Countess over to him. He said he hadn't seen a cat in 100 years. Ethan placed the Countess on his bed. The Countess sniffed him. Then she lay down on his legs and fell asleep. The man began to cry, quietly, not from pain. Ethan left. He didn't know how to be around other people's tears. He knew how to do things, bring medicine, make coffee, build systems. But standing next to a crying person and just being there, that he didn't know how to do? Not yet. Mochi woke up at dawn on the 10th day. Ethan sensed it before he heard her voice. The armor trembled, as if someone had turned over in their sleep. Then a voice said, "Good morning." Ethan said she'd slept for 26 hours. Mochi said the hospital had been heavy. Heavier than the store and the pharmacy combined. Ethan asked why. Mochi thought for a moment and said there was a lot of pain in the hospital. The walls, remember, the pain. That makes the building heavier. Ethan took note. For Mochi, a building's weight is determined not by its physical size, but by the amount of human experience associated with it. He thought this was the most illogical, and yet the most understandable parameter he had ever encountered. The fortress began to move, 20 kilometers per hour. Ethan sat behind the wheel of the bus, guiding Mochi along a country road. Hannah sat in the ward, making her rounds among the patients. Lily sat on the hull outside, counting the trees. They were heading south. On the evening of the 10th day, Ethan held his first meeting. He gathered everyone who could walk in the 7-Eleven store. Hannah. The 4 patients who were on their feet. Lily. The Countess sat on the counter, pretending she wasn't interested. Ethan stood before them and felt strange. He had never led people before. At the Costco warehouse, he managed flows, goods, schedules, not people. But now, sitting before him were people who were looking at him and waiting. He cleared his throat. He explained that the situation was as follows. They had 4 buildings inside the fortress. A store with enough food to last 7 days at their current rate of consumption, a pharmacy with enough medicine to last a month, a hospital with 12 beds, a bus capable of traveling at 20 kilometers per hour. There were 16 of them, plus a cat, plus a turtle. Heading south. Destination, Portland. Estimated time of arrival, 5 to 6 days. Potential threats along the way. Others, looters, scavengers. He said he'd welcome any suggestions. Silence. One of the patients, a man in his 40s with a bandaged arm, asked who had appointed him in charge. Ethan said no one had, that he wasn't in charge, that he was the warehouse manager. The man asked what difference it made. Ethan thought for a moment and said that a warehouse manager doesn't give orders. He organizes the space so that everything runs smoothly. The man said those were nice words. Ethan said they weren't just words. They were his job description. Hannah, who had been silent the whole time, said that Ethan had done more for her patients in 3 hours than anyone else had in 9 days. She said she didn't care who was in charge here, but if anyone wants to argue, they should bring her some coffee first. The man looked at her. He looked at Ethan. He sat back down. The argument was over. Ethan thought that Hannah Jenkins was the most effective people management tool he'd ever seen. He wrote it down in his log. Day 10, first crew meeting, result. Consensus reached. Method. Hannah. On the 12th day, 2 events occurred. First, Mochi grew. Not because it had absorbed a building, but it simply grew. Ethan noticed this in the morning when he went outside. The hull had gotten bigger by about 10%. Mochi explained that it grows when the people inside feel safe. Ethan asked her to repeat that. Mochi confirmed it. The more people inside feel at home, the faster it grows. Ethan thought about it. Then he wrote it down. Growth parameter, the inhabitants' subjective sense of safety. The correlation was direct. Practical conclusion. For the fortress to become stronger, the people inside need to be happy. It was the most illogical and at the same time the most logical system Ethan had ever analyzed. The second event was worse. Motorcycles appeared on the horizon. 3 dots, then 5, then 8. They were riding along a parallel road a kilometer to the east. Ethan watched them through a second-floor window of the hospital. Scavengers. They weren't getting any closer. They were riding parallel to them. They were following us. Ethan went downstairs. He told Hannah. Hannah said a bad word. Then she asked how many. Ethan said 8 motorcycles. Hannah said another bad word. Ethan said that for now, they were just watching. Hannah asked what they would do when they stopped watching. Ethan said he was thinking. Hannah told him to think faster. Ethan thought. The scavengers had the advantage in speed, the advantage in firepower, the advantage in numbers. Ethan had one advantage. Space. He could manipulate space. He could stow things inside the armor. He could extend rooms outward. He hadn't tried the second one yet. But Mochi said it was possible to extend a single room from the armor like a pull-out drawer. But what good would that do? Extend a store? Useless. A pharmacy? Useless. A hospital? Useless less. A bus? A bus. Ethan paused. The bus was connected to Mochi. The bus provided speed, but what if he used the bus differently? Not for movement, but as, he thought, a bus is a metal shell, heavy, with wheels. Mochi could push it outward and then pull it back in. Quickly! What if? Ethan looked at the map. 10 kilometers ahead was a bridge, a small one, over a river, a single lane. If the scavengers tried to cross the bridge, then no, this isn't a fight. Ethan isn't a fighter. He's an engineer. He has to think like an engineer. Problem, 8 motorcycles are in pursuit. Solution, make the pursuit impossible. How? Remove the road. Ethan looked at Mochi. He asked if she could eat a piece of the road. Mochi thought for a moment. She said that a road isn't a building, but a bridge is a structure. Ethan smiled. A bridge is a structure. They reached the bridge in 5 hours. The scavengers stayed a kilometer behind. They didn't attack. They waited. Ethan crossed the bridge on Mochi. He stopped on the other side. He got off. He placed his palm on the concrete railing of the bridge. Mochi crawled up to him. Ethan told her to eat the bridge. Mochi opened her mouth. The bridge vanished entirely. The supports, the deck, the railings, the asphalt. In place of the bridge, there was a river. Not very wide, 15 meters, but without the bridge, it was impassable for motorcycles. The riders pulled up to the edge. They stood there. They watched. Ethan stood on the other bank and looked at them. Jaewook wasn't among them. His men were there. One of them shouted across the river. He shouted that Ethan would regret it. Ethan didn't shout anything back. He turned around. He went into the armored vehicle. Mochi moved further south. He made a note in the log. Day 12, tactical decision number 2. Destroyed the bridge. Pursuit interrupted. Capacity is now 5. Store, pharmacy, bus, hospital, bridge. The practical value of the bridge inside the shell is 0. The tactical value of the decision is maximum. Note, the bridge is considered a structure. This expands the possibilities. We need to explore the boundaries of the definition. Hannah found him that evening on the bus. He was sitting behind the wheel, looking at the road through the window. Hannah sat down in the seat across the aisle. She was silent for a minute. Then she said he was doing well. Ethan asked what exactly. Hannah said, the decisions. He had eaten that was clever. Ethan said it was logistics. Hannah said that logistics is when you arrange boxes correctly, but what he does is something else. Ethan said that boxes and bridges follow the same principles. Hannah looked at him for a long time. Then she asked when he last slept. Ethan tried to remember. He couldn't. Hannah said he would sleep now. Ethan said he had to run the fortress. Hannah said the fortress could wait. Ethan said the scavengers. Hannah said that the scavengers were on the other side of the river with no bridge. Ethan opened his mouth to object. Hannah looked at him with that look which, as he had already realized, meant the end of the discussion. He shut his mouth. He stood up. He went to the ward on the second floor. He lay down on his cot. The Countess came and lay down beside him. With a fog in his head, said good night. Ethan closed his eyes and thought that he now had a team. A small one, a strange one, consisting of a nurse with the temperament of a child, with drawings of a cat and a turtle. But a team nonetheless. He fell asleep in 30 seconds, and for the first time in 12 days, he had no dreams. They had been driving through Oregon for 3 days. The landscape had changed. The forests had grown denser. The roads were narrower. Towns were fewer and farther between. There were fewer of them, but the ones they were larger. Ethan saw one the size of a truck. The creature stood in the middle of a field and didn't move. It just stood there, like a monument. Mochi drove around it half a kilometer away. The creature didn't even turn around. Mochi said that large others don't hunt. They wait. Ethan asked what they were waiting for. Mochi didn't answer. He jotted down the question in his journal and drove on. Hannah was at the hospital, tending to the patients. 3 of the 12 were already walking on their own. The man with the broken hip had started to stand up with the help of a crutch that Ethan had cobbled together from a mop and a medical splint. The child with the fever had made a full recovery and was now running around the store with Lily. 2 children in the fort. Ethan thought this was both the best and worst thing that could have happened. The best because Lily had stopped being silent. She was talking to a boy. His name was Tommy. He was 8. They were playing in the store between the shelves and building forts out of potato chip boxes. The worst, because now Ethan had 2 children to look after, and he still didn't quite understand how to take care of even one. On the 15th day after the rift, they saw Portland, or rather, what was left of Portland. The city lay in the valley beneath a gray sky and looked like a skeleton. The skyscrapers were still standing, but the windows were shattered. The bridges across the Willamette had partially collapsed. A cloud of something dark hung over downtown. Not smoke, something else. Mochi said it was a swarm of small others. Thousands of them. They swarmed over the city like gnats. Ethan stood on a hill and watched it all. Somewhere out there was the university campus. Somewhere out there was Soyeon, if she was still alive. He took out a pair of binoculars from the hospital's first aid kit. Army issue, powerful. He trained them on the campus area. The buildings were still standing, some of them. He saw barricades. He saw signs of fortifications. Someone was out there. Someone was holding out. But between the hill and the campus lay the entire city center full of the others. Ethan lowered his binoculars. Hannah was standing next to him. She said he wouldn't go there. Ethan said he would. Hannah said it was suicide. Ethan said his sister was there. Hannah said he had 16 people here. Ethan looked at her. She was looking at him. They stood like that for 10 seconds. Then Ethan said he wouldn't lead the fortress through downtown. That he'd go alone. On foot. Hannah said a bad word, then a second one, then a third. Ethan waited for her to finish. She finished. She said that if he went alone, she'd go with him. Ethan said that someone had to stay with the patients. Hannah said the patients were stable, that the 4 walkers could handle it, that she wouldn't let him go alone because the fortress needed him alive. Ethan wanted to object. Then he realized she was right. Not because the fortress needed him, but because going alone into a city full of monsters wasn't bravery, it was poor planning. They set out at dawn on the 16th day, Ethan and Hannah. Mochi stayed on the hill with Lily and the patients. The voice in her head was anxious. Mochi said that without her, he was vulnerable. Ethan said he knew. He said he'd be back. Mochi paused and said he smelled like someone who'd told her that before. Ethan didn't understand what she meant. He didn't have time to ask. They had to keep going. They walked along the outskirts, quietly, through courtyards and alleys. Hannah moved well, quietly, confidently. Ethan asked where the nurse had picked up such skills. Hannah said she'd grown up in Detroit and that in Detroit, you either learn to walk quietly or you don't walk at all. Ethan accepted that as a sufficient explanation. They skirted around clusters of the others. Small creatures roamed the streets in packs. The larger ones stood motionless at intersections. Mocha was right. If you aren't afraid, they don't notice you. But not being afraid when a creature with a mouth the size of a doorway is standing 10 meters away from you is a skill you can't master in 2 weeks. Ethan was afraid. He just didn't let fear control his legs. Hannah, beside him, was breathing steadily. Maybe she was afraid too. Maybe not. He didn't ask. It took them 5 hours to reach the campus. 4 kilometers through a dead city. The campus was partially destroyed. The main building was still standing. The library was still standing. The dorms were partially intact. There was a wall around the campus. Not a real wall, but a barricade made of cars, furniture, and concrete blocks. There were people behind the barricade. Ethan saw movement, silhouettes. Someone spotted them. A scream, then a second one. 2 people ran up to the barricade with homemade spears. Young people, students. They were looking at Ethan and Hannah and aiming at them. Ethan raised his hands. He said he was looking for his sister, Lee So-yeon, a student. One of them lowered his spear. He exchanged a glance with the other. He said So-yeon was here. Ethan felt his legs give way. He didn't fall, but he almost did. Hannah grabbed his elbow and held him steady. He looked at her. She nodded. He exhaled. For the first time in 16 days, he exhaled fully. So-yeon came out 10 minutes later. She was different. Not the So-yeon he remembered. That So-yeon wore big sweaters, laughed too loudly, and sent him memes at 3 in the morning. This So-yeon was thinner. She tougher. Her hair was cut short. She had scrapes on her arms. Her face had the expression of someone accustomed to making decisions on which lives depend. She saw him. She stopped. She looked at him. Then she walked over and punched him in the chest. Not hard. Then she hugged him. Tightly. Very tightly. Ethan hugged her back. He stood there, holding her. Hannah turned away and looked at the barricade. She gave them a minute. So-yeon stepped back. She looked at him. She said he looked terrible. Ethan said she did too. So-yeon almost smiled. Then she asked how he'd gotten there. Ethan sat on a turtle. So-yeon looked at him with that look he'd known since childhood, the look that meant she thought he was joking but wasn't sure. He wasn't joking. So-yeon led him across campus. 47 people, mostly students, a few faculty members. Why, 1 security guard. They'd held out for 2 weeks. Barricades, rationing, watch shifts. So-yeon was one of those who'd organized the defense. Not the only one, but one of the key figures. Ethan listened and watched, and he saw that his younger sister, whom he'd looked after and protected his whole life and for whom he worried every day, didn't need saving. She'd managed on her own. She'd built her own life, small, fragile, but her own. He offered to take her with him, to gather everyone up, to bring them to the fortress. So-yeon looked at him for a long time. Then she said no. Ethan didn't understand. He asked again. So-yeon said that these people were her responsibility, that they had built something here, that she wouldn't abandon them. Ethan said it was safer in the fortress. So-yeon said that safety wasn't the only thing that mattered. Ethan wanted to argue. He wanted to say that she didn't understand, that the world had changed, that she needed protection. Then he looked at her scraped hands, at her eyes, which showed weariness but no fear. And he understood. She understood. Better than he did. She didn't need his protection. She needed his respect. He closed his mouth. Opened it again. Said he understood. So-yeon tilted her head, asked if it was true. Ethan said no, that he didn't understand, but that he would accept it. For the first time during the entire conversation, So-yeon smiled genuinely. He spent a day on campus. He left the medicine from the pharmacy. He told them about Moche, about the fortress, about the scavengers. So-yeon listened. She asked questions. She took notes. She was methodical, just like him, a family trait. Ethan told Hannah that So-yeon wouldn't be going with them. Hannah was silent for a moment. Then she said that his sister was a smart woman. Ethan said he knew. Hannah said he was smart
too, just in a different way. Ethan asked how exactly it was different. Hannah said that he was smart when it came to building a house, but was still learning to understand that a house isn't just walls, it's the people who want to stay in it. Ethan thought about that. He wrote it down in his journal, then he crossed it out. Then he wrote it down again. At dawn, on the 18th day, they were leaving the campus. Soyeon was standing by the barricade. Ethan turned around. She raised her hand. He raised his.
Then he turned and walked away. Hannah walked beside him, saying nothing. It was the right kind of silence, not empty, but full. The return trip took 4 hours. After Portland, Ethan changed course, heading north, back the way they'd come, because in the south was Soyeon, and she was managing. And in the north were the enclaves, and the scavengers, and people who weren't managing. Hannah asked why they were going back. Ethan said they had a fortress that could move, medicine, food, expertise. If they just traveled from one place to another and helped out, in a month they'd accomplish more than any stationary enclave could in half a year. Hannah looked at him and said he'd just described a mobile hospital. Ethan thought for a moment and said it was more like a mobile trading post with a medical wing. Hannah said she liked the hospital idea better. Ethan said they needed to exchange resources with other survivors, and for that, they needed a trading system. Hannah said that people don't trade with a hospital on wheels. They come for help. Ethan said that's exactly why a trading format is needed, so that people come as equals, not as supplicants, because supplicants feel like they're in debt. And sooner or later, those in debt start to hate the person they owe. Hannah looked at him. She said that for a warehouse manager, he understood people suspiciously well. Ethan said that it wasn't people, but patterns of consumer behavior. Hannah snorted. But she stopped arguing. The fortress headed north along the coastal road. Ethan drove it parallel to the ocean. The road was almost empty. Few cars. Few others, too. The coast was calmer than the inland areas. Mochi said that the others didn't like salt water. Ethan made a note of it. On the 20th day, they came across it. Ethan pulled Mochi over to the side of the road to check out an abandoned gas station. The gas station was empty. There was no fuel, but in the small store attached to the station, he found canned food and water. He carried 3 boxes out to Mochi and set them on the ground. And he heard a sound. Quiet, metallic, the click of a bolt. He froze. He turned slowly. A girl was lying on the gas station roof with a rifle, a long barrel, a scope. She was looking at him through the scope with her left eye. Ethan noticed that. Her left eye? She was left-handed. He raised his hands. He said he wasn't a looter. The girl on the roof was silent. 5 seconds. 10. Then she said in English with a slight accent that he was standing in her collection zone. Ethan asked whose zone it was. The girl said it was hers, Shujin's. Ethan said his name was Ethan Han and that he was the warehouse manager. Shujin on the roof didn't change her stance. She asked why the warehouse manager was in her zone. Ethan said he needed canned goods. Yujin said the canned goods were hers. Ethan said he was willing to trade. Yujin asked what he had. Ethan thought for a moment. Then he said he had a pharmacy, a whole pharmacy, and a hospital, and a store. Inside the turtle, Yujin was silent for 3 seconds. Then she said he was either crazy or a spellcaster. Ethan said the latter. Yujin lowered her rifle. She climbed down from the roof. Ethan saw her fully. Young, 24 maybe, skinny, fit. Her movements were precise, economical, not a single unnecessary gesture. A camouflage jacket, army boots, her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, and the rifle, an SV, a sniper rifle. She carried it as if it were a part of her body. Ethan recognized the model. He'd seen it in documentaries. He asked where she'd gotten the SVD. Yujin said she'd fixed it. She'd found it disassembled at a military base and put it back together. Ethan looked at her, then at the rifle, then back at her. He said it was impressive. Yujin shrugged. The exchange was simple. Ethan gave her bandages and antibiotics. Eugen gave him 3 cans of food and a canister of water. Then Ethan asked where she was going. Eugen said nowhere. She was traveling along the coast, hunting the others, scavenging supplies from gas stations and stores. Alone. Ethan asked how long she'd been on her own. Eugen looked at him. Her expression hadn't changed. She said it had been that way from day one, that she'd come to the U.S. for marksmanship training a month before the rift, that her team had been in Seattle when the sky split open, that she didn't know what had become of them, that she wasn't looking for them. Ethan heard not what she said, but what she didn't say. She wasn't looking because she was afraid of what she might find. He didn't press her. He offered to let her ride with them, temporarily, as protection. In exchange for food, medicine, and shelter. Eugen looked at Mochi, at the armor, at the small window of the hospital on the 2nd floor. She looked at Ethan. She said 1 week, no more. Ethan agreed. Eugen entered the fortress and said nothing. She walked through the bus, through the store, through the pharmacy, through the hospital in silence. She surveyed every room, every exit, every window. Ethan followed her and realized she was assessing the fortress as a firing position. Not as a home, as a position. She went up to the 2nd floor of the hospital. She looked out of the window, a 360-degree view. Good, she said the windows were too big, that a sniper needs a slit, not a window, that the angle of fire from this position was good, but the elevation wasn't sufficient, that if there were a roof with a parapet, it would be better. Ethan listened and took notes. Hannah walked in. She looked at Eugen. Eugen looked at Hannah. 2 women who were used to fending for themselves were sizing each other up. Hannah held out her hand. Eugen shook it. Briefly, Hannah said there were 2 rules in the fortress. First, everyone eats together. Second, no one dies without her permission. Eugen thought for a moment and said the second rule was unrealistic. Hannah said it worked for now. Eugen accepted that. That evening, Ethan sat on the bus, lost in thought.
Eugen had said she needed a firing position, and not a window, but a real firing position with a parapet, a firing angle, and a rest for her left hand. Ethan could have found something suitable and asked Mochi to eat it, but his capacity was 5, and all his slots were taken. A store, a pharmacy, a bus.
A hospital. A bridge. A bridge? Ethan looked at Mochi. He asked if he could spit out the bridge to free up a slot. Mochi said yes. Ethan asked if he could then eat something new in the freed-up slot. Mochi said yes. Ethan thought about it. The bridge had been useful once. Now it was just a useless chunk of concrete inside his armor. But a sniper's firing position was a constant asset. The decision was obvious, but Ethan didn't spit out the bridge right away. First, he had to find a suitable structure. No, not just suitable, the right one. He remembered what Eugen had said. Height, parapet, field of fire, a rest for the left hand, left. She's left-handed. Standard firing positions are designed for right-handers. Eugen shoots from her left shoulder. She needs a rest on the right side, not the left. Ethan jotted down the specifications. Then he thought he didn't need to write them down. He could have just found any tower or watchtower. But he didn't want just any. He wanted the right one. For her, he didn't stop to analyze why. He was an engineer. An engineer designs for the task at hand. The task is specific, so the solution is specific. On the 22nd day, they found a fire tower. In the woods, made of wood, 10 meters high. A 3 by 3 meter platform at the top. Railings around the perimeter. A roof. A ladder. It stood at the edge of the forest above a country road. Empty. Intact. Ethan climbed to the top. He surveyed the platform. The view was magnificent, 360 degrees. The railing was wooden, but sturdy. The height was sufficient. He did the math. If he incorporated this tower into the shell, it would end up inside it. And if he then extended it outward through the top of the shell, it would stick up like a tower on a turtle's back. A sniper's nest on the roof of a moving fortress. He climbed down. He told Mochi to spit out the bridge. Mochi opened her mouth. The bridge appeared in the clearing, a concrete structure in the middle of the forest. A strange sight. Then Ethan placed his palm on the turret's support. Mochi ate it. Capacity back to 5. Store, pharmacy, bus, hospital, fire tower. Ethan went inside. The turret stood inside the shell. A staircase led upward. He climbed up. The platform was in place. Railings. The roof. He asked Mochi to extend the tower outward. The shell hummed. The upper part of the shell opened. The tower slowly rose. The platform ended up above the shell, 10 meters above the ground. The wind. The view. Yujin stayed for a 3rd week and a 4th. She didn't say she was staying. She just didn't leave. Every morning she climbed up to the tower. She sat down. She rested her rifle on the rest that Ethan had modified overnight. Her left hand on the forend, or her right on the trigger. The rest was perfectly adjusted to her height and the angle of her shoulder. She noticed it on that first morning. She ran her fingers over the wood of the rest. She didn't say anything, but from that day on, she stopped calling the fortress a turtle and started calling it base. For Yujin, that was the equivalent of another person saying thank you. On the 26th day, the fortress was operating as a mobile trading post. Ethan had devised a system. The Mochi would stop at an intersection or a fork in the road. A single room would extend from the shell, a store, the door opened outward. A sign that Lily had drawn with colored pencils hung on the door. On the sign was a turtle with an inscription: open, trade, no weapons. People came. First 1 or 2, then in groups, survivors from nearby farms and small towns. They brought whatever they had: fuel, fabric, tools, and fresh vegetables from gardens that someone had managed to preserve. Ethan traded these for medicine and canned goods. Hannah examined the wounded right in the store. Yujin sat on A and kept watch over the perimeter. Lily stood at the entrance and handed out cups of water to people. She came up with that idea herself. Ethan hadn't asked her to. He saw her and thought that a 6-year-old child understood the principle of hospitality better than most adults. On the 28th day, Minju arrived. She appeared on the road alone, small, thin, with a backpack bigger than she was.
She was walking straight toward the fortress. She wasn't afraid, or maybe she was afraid, but she kept walking. Yujin spotted her from the watchtower. She reported it to Ethan. Ethan went out. The girl stopped in front of him.
She said she'd heard about a turtle that trades. She asked if it was true. Ethan said it was. The girl said she had nothing to trade, but that she knew how to cook. Ethan asked what she could cook. The girl said anything from anything. She introduced herself, Park Minju, 22 years old, a culinary school student. Ethan invited her inside. Minju entered the shop. She looked at the shelves. She looked at the canned goods.
She looked at the hot plate that Ethan had plugged into the power outlet on the armor. Then she opened her backpack. She took out a worn notebook, knives, 3 of them, wrapped in cloth, professional grade, sharp. She treasured them the way others treasure weapons. She asked permission to use the kitchen. Ethan said there was no kitchen, just a hot plate and a pot. Minju smiled. It was the first smile Ethan had seen in a month in this world. A broad one, a genuine one. She said that a stovetop and a pot were already a restaurant. She made dinner out of canned beans, freeze-dried rice, and a single egg she'd been carrying in her backpack for 3 days. A single egg. She cracked it into a bowl and cried. Then she wiped away her tears, beat it with a fork, and added it to the rice. And it turned into something. Ethan couldn't describe the taste. He'd been eating cafeteria food for 3 years. Before that, microwave meals for 4 years. Before that, he'd eaten what his mother cooked, and he hadn't appreciated it back then. What Minju made from a can of beans, freeze-dried rice, and a single egg was the best thing he'd ever eaten in his life. Hannah ate in silence and then asked for seconds. Yujin ate slowly and carefully, as if memorizing every flavor. Lily ate and wiggled her feet under the table. The patients ate in silence. Mochi got her grapes. The Countess received a piece of canned fish that Minju had prepared separately for her. Minju fed everyone and watched them eat. Her face bore an expression that Ethan had only seen in people who had found their place. He asked her if she wanted to stay. Minju said she had already stayed. Ethan made an entry in the log. Day 28. New crew member, Park Minju. Position, cook. Qualification, advanced. ROI, infinite. On the 30th day, Mochi had grown again. Capacity, 6. Ethan sensed it that morning. Mochi said it was warmer inside, that the people inside felt better, that it nourished her. Ethan looked at the fortress, at the store where Lily was drawing behind the cash register, at the hospital where Hannah was making her rounds, at the watchtower where Eugene was scanning the horizon, at the kitchen corner of the store where Minju was already chopping something while humming. He thought that Mochi was growing because the people inside were happy, and that the strangest thing was, it was working. He found what he was looking for. On the 12th day, a small bakery on the outskirts of a ghost town, a standalone building, brick with large ovens, with sacks of flour in the back room, with wooden bread racks, with a smell that hadn't faded even after a month. Ethan brought Minju there. She walked in. She stopped. She looked at the ovens, at the racks, at the sacks of flour. She turned to Ethan. She asked why he'd brought her here. Ethan said that Mochi could eat this bakery, that they had an open slot, that Minju deserved a proper kitchen. Minju stood there and looked at him. Then she turned away. She stood facing the oven and said nothing. Her shoulders were shaking. Ethan waited. Minju turned around. Her eyes were red. She said her family had run a small restaurant in Seattle's Koreatown, that she'd wanted to inherit it, that the restaurant had burned down on the first day of the rift, that she dreams of setting up tables every night. Ethan was silent. Then he said that this bakery wasn't her restaurant, but that she could cook in it, and that Mochi would be happy to eat her food. Minju wiped her eyes. She nodded. Mochi devoured the bakery, the 6th building. Minju entered the new kitchen and didn't come out for 4 hours. When she emerged, the fortress smelled of fresh bread, the first bread in a month. Ethan stood in the hallway between the pharmacy and the bakery, breathing in the scent and thinking that this was the smell of a normal life, and that a normal life could exist inside a turtle's shell in a world where the sky had cracked. He took a piece of bread, hot, soft. He took a bite. He closed his eyes. Minju stood in the bakery doorway watching him. She didn't say a word. She just watched the man eating her bread, and that was enough. That evening, there was dinner, the first real dinner. Minju had baked bread, a lot of it. Everyone. Ethan handed out slices to everyone. To Hannah, because no one had died today. To Eugene, because she'd put down her rifle for the first time in a week. To Minju, because her recipe was still alive. To Lily, a double portion. To Mochi, some grapes. To the patients, who were already sitting at the communal table. Tommy, who was sitting next to Lily and dangling his feet. Grafina got a separate piece soaked in water because she was missing half her teeth. Then Ethan sat down. He took a bite of his piece, and he realized this was the first dinner in many years that he wasn't eating alone. He didn't say anything. He just poured everyone some tea from the tea bags found at the bakery. The tea was bad, but it was hot, and there was enough for everyone. Eugene held her cup with both hands and looked out the window. Hannah leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. Minju sat on the floor next to Mochi and fed her grapes, one by one. Lily and Tommy fell asleep right at the table. Ethan watched it all. He wrote it down in his journal. Day 32, dinner, the first one, a real one. The bread KPI was met. The people KPI. He crossed out the line. He rewrote it. Crew status, home. On the 35th day, Clarissa West appeared. She didn't come to the fortress. The fortress picked up her signal. Ethan was fiddling with the bus radio, trying to pick up anything on the air, when a voice suddenly cut through the static. Faint, intermittent. The voice repeated a single phrase over and over. Coordinates and the word help. Ethan wrote down the coordinates. He looked at the map. 12 kilometers to the northeast. A small town. He led Mochi there. Yujin scanned the horizon from the tower. Hannah was preparing medical supplies in case anyone was injured. Minju was making soup. Because Minju always made soup when she was nervous. They arrived an hour later. The town was deserted, like all small towns. The signal was coming from a 2-story building on the main street, a former telecommunications company. On the roof was an antenna, a homemade one, cobbled together from pieces of various antennas, rewired with wire and duct tape. Ethan looked at the antenna and thought that whoever had built it was either a genius or a madman. He knocked on the door. A voice came from inside, a woman's voice. The voice asked who was there. Ethan said he was the one who'd picked up the signal. Silence. Then the door opened. A young woman stood in the doorway, 27 years old, glasses, one arm of the frame taped in place with duct tape. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail with a pencil. A t-shirt with a startup logo. There were burn marks from a soldering iron on her hands. She looked at Ethan, then at Mochi behind him, then back at Ethan. She said she was expecting an army, or at least a group of armed people, not just one guy with a giant turtle. Ethan said a turtle was better than an army. The girl raised an eyebrow. Her name was Clarissa West. She was Before the collapse, she'd worked at a startup that built mesh networks, autonomous communication networks that operate without central infrastructure. Each device is both a receiver and a transmitter. When the world collapsed, Clarissa turned out to be one of the few people on the planet who knew how to restore communication without power plants or cell towers. She barricaded herself in the office. She assembled a transmitter from the wreckage of her equipment. She connected it to a solar panel on the roof, and she began transmitting every day for 20 days. Coordinates and a plea for help. No one answered until today. Ethan brought her to the fortress. Clarissa walked through the rooms and touched the walls. She asked how the armor's power system worked, how the signal passed through the walls, whether there was electromagnetic shielding. Ethan didn't know the answers. Clarissa said she'd figure it out. Ethan asked if that meant she was staying. Clarissa looked at him over her glasses, which were taped in place with duct tape. She said that for 20 days, no one had responded to her signal, but he'd arrived on a turtle. That she was staying if only to understand how this thing worked. In the first 3 days, Clarissa took apart half the wiring in the bus and reassembled it. Ethan found her at 4 in the morning on the floor of the bus, surrounded by wires, a soldering iron in her hand, and a wild gleam in her eyes. She said she'd found the frequency on which Mochi transmits energy, that she could connect external devices to that frequency, that if she found one more transmitter, she could build a relay network. A small one. Local, but functional, a connection between the fortress and other points within a 50-kilometer radius. Ethan sat down on the floor next to her. He asked what she needed. Clarissa handed him a list: 3 transmitters, cable, power supplies, a directional antenna, an omnidirectional antenna, a decent soldering station, not that piece of junk. Ethan wrote it down. He said he'd find them. Clarissa looked at him. She said she was serious. Ethan said he was serious. Clarissa looked at her list, then at Ethan. Then she said quietly that no one had ever taken her seriously when she asked for equipment. Usually they'd say the budget wouldn't allow it, or that it wasn't a priority, or that the girl with the wires could wait. Ethan said there was no budget. It was the top priority. The girl with the wires was the only person within 100 kilometers who could restore communication to the people. Clarissa, silence. Then she turned away to her wires. Ethan left. An hour later, he heard a strange sound coming from the bus. Clarissa was crying quietly over her soldering iron. He didn't go in. He didn't want to disturb her. He went to look for the transmitters. On the 40th day, Clarissa picked up a second signal. Not a distress call. Negotiations. Organized. Encrypted. She cracked the code in 6 hours. The negotiations were being led by an enclave, a large one. It called itself the Pyramid. The name Marcus Reed came up often, the Enchanter Lord. His enclave controlled the territory north of Portland, several fortified neighborhoods, more than 1,000 people, weapons, structure, hierarchy. Clarissa listened to their negotiations for 2 days. Then she went to Ethan with the recordings. She said that Pyramid knew about the fortress, that Marcus Reed was interested, that he had sent an embassy, that the embassy was looking for them right now. Ethan looked at the recordings. He read them. Marcus Reed, a spellcaster with a spirit beast. Clarissa hadn't been able to identify exactly which one. He controls the largest enclave in the region. He wants to meet with the owner of the turtle. He's offering an alliance. Ethan thought about it. An alliance with a major enclave. That means resources, protection, stability, but it also means dependence, control, submission to someone else's rules. He remembered Soyeon. She'd refused to go with him because she didn't want to lose her independence. Maybe he shouldn't lose his either. He told Clarissa to keep listening, not to respond. Not yet. The Pyramid Embassy found them on the 43rd day. 3 people, clean clothes, good weapons were top-notch. Their faces were calm, professional. They pulled up in an SUV. They stopped in front of the fortress. One of them got out. A man, about 40 years old, short haircut, a suit, wearing a suit in the apocalypse. Ethan went out to meet him. The man introduced himself, Advisor Grayson, ambassador of the Pyramid Enclave. He delivered an invitation from Lord Marcus Reed. Marcus invites Ethan to the pyramid to discuss cooperation. He guarantees safety and offers full access to the Enclave's resources. In exchange, Grayson smiled. In exchange, just a conversation. To start with, Ethan looked at him, then at the SUV, then at the watchtower, where Eugen was sitting with her rifle aimed at the SUV's windshield. He said he'd think about it. Grayson said Marcus didn't like to wait. Ethan said that he too didn't like a lot of things, but lived with them. Grayson stopped smiling. Then he smiled again. Professionally, he said he'd leave a frequency for communication, that Marcus was hoping for a positive response. They drove off. Ethan returned to his exosuit. Hannah was waiting for him at the store. She said it smelled bad. Ethan said he agreed. Hannah said that when a man in a suit arrives in the apocalypse in a clean car and smiles, it means he has enough power not to be afraid. And people with that kind of power don't invite you in for a conversation. They summon you. Ethan made an entry in his log. Day 43. Contact with the Pyramid Enclave. Ambassador Grayson. Alliance proposal from Lord Marcus Reed. Preliminary assessment, a trap. Confidence level, 70%. Action, monitoring. Prepare for rejection. Prepare for the consequences of rejection. Ethan did not respond to the pyramid. Instead, he led the fortress west toward the coast, further away from Marcus Reed's territory and further away from any major enclaves. Clarissa continued to listen in on the pyramid's negotiations. Marcus was not used to being rejected. His people mentioned the fortress more and more often. Their tone shifted from interested to irritated. Clarissa told Ethan that they might have 2 weeks before that irritation turned into action. Ethan said that in 2 weeks he planned to be far away. Clarissa said that Marcus controlled the territory from Portland to Olympia. The only thing beyond that was the ocean. Ethan looked at the map. She was right. They were boxed in. To the south were Portland and Pyramid territory. To the east were the mountains and large clusters of others. To the west was the ocean. To the north were Seattle and the Fallers. Ethan sat poring over the map and realized that
Logistics were failing him. He couldn't keep running forever into a fortress that traveled at 20 kilometers per hour. Sooner or later, someone traveling faster would corner them. He needed power, not military strength,
strategic strength. He needed to become too valuable to be destroyed or too costly to fight against. He thought about it for 3 days. Then he called a council meeting. Hannah, Eugen, Minju, Clarissa. Lily sat in the corner drawing. The Countess was sleeping on Eugen's lap. This was surprising in itself because the Countess never sat on anyone's lap except Ethan's and Lily's. Eugen pretended not to notice, but Ethan saw that she hadn't moved a muscle for 20 minutes so as not to disturb the cat. He laid out the situation. They were cornered Two forces were hunting them, the scavengers from the south and the pyramid from the north. They had no resources for a fight. They didn't have enough resources to flee. They needed a strategy that wasn't about fighting or fleeing. Hannah said they needed allies. Ethan said allies meant dependence. Hannah said dependence was better than death. Eugene said they could kill the leaders, one shot each. Ethan looked at her. She was completely serious. He said that would create a power vacuum that would be filled by someone worse. Eugene shrugged. She proposed the solution she knew. Clarissa said that information is a weapon, that she's been eavesdropping on the pyramid's negotiations, that the pyramid isn't a monolith, that there are malcontents within it, that Marcus Reed maintains power through fear, that if the people inside the pyramid learn there's an alternative, the balance could shift. Ethan looked at her. He asked what the alternative was. Clarissa looked at him as if the answer were obvious. She said it was them, the fortress, a place that moves, trades, heals, and feeds. A place you can come and go from, not an enclave.
Not a prison, a home on wheels. Minju said that a home on wheels should have a name. Everyone looked at her. She said that if people are going to talk about them, they need a name. Not a fortress, not a base, a name. Lily looked up from her drawing.
She said one word, Ark. Everyone was silent. Then Hannah said that the girl was 6 years old and she had just named them better than any of the adults present. Ethan wrote it down. Ark. The strategy was simple. Clarissa would start broadcasting, not a distress signal, information, the ARC's coordinates, schedule of stops, terms of trade, medical assistance. Anyone can come, anyone can leave. No oath, no obedience, just exchange. Ethan understood the risk. The broadcast would attract not only those in need, it would also attract predators. But the predators already know where they are, but those in need don't know. If people start coming to the Ark will cease to be a target. It will become an institution. And institutions are harder to destroy than a single target. Clarissa launched the broadcast on the 45th day. She recorded a message, a short one. Coordinates. Update frequency. Every 12 hours. Conditions. Name. Ark. The antenna on the roof of the hull broadcast the signal within a radius of 100 kilometers. Ethan stood next to Clarissa as she turned on the transmitter. She flipped the switch. The indicator lit up. The signal went out. Clarissa looked at Ethan and said that either they had just saved themselves or they had signed their own death warrant. Ethan said that in logistics, this is called a calculable risk. Clarissa said that in communications, this is called a broadcast, and that the result is usually just as predictable. People began arriving 3 days later. First individuals, then couples, then small groups. They came with all sorts of things, with questions, with wounds, with children, with their last cans of food, which they carried as currency. Ethan traded, Hannah treated them, Minju fed them. Eugene stood guard. Clarissa took notes, names, coordinates, who was from where, what they knew, what they'd seen. She was mapping out the world, not a geographical map, a human one. Who had survived where, what groups existed, what resources were available, what threats loomed. A week after the broadcast began, she had a map of the entire coastline from Seattle to the California border. 14 known groups of survivors, 3 small enclaves, 2 hostile, 1 neutral, dozens of loners, hundreds of people who knew that the turtle was out there somewhere. The Ark was becoming well known. Ethan could feel the situation changing. When you're alone, you're a victim. When 100 people know about you, you're a resource. When 1,000 people know about you, you're a force, even if you don't have a single soldier. On the 50th day, Naomi Cho arrived. She didn't come like everyone else, not along the road, not from the woods. She was sitting on Mochi's shell that morning when Ethan stepped outside. Just sitting there, small, thin, 20 years old, maybe younger. Her clothes were strange. White, long, like a cassock, barefoot, symbols drawn on her arms with something black. She sat there, stroking the armor. Mochi didn't protest. That was strange, because Mochi could sense people's intentions and wouldn't let anyone in who meant harm. So this girl didn't mean any harm. Ethan approached. He asked who she was. Naomi looked up. Her eyes were dark, large, empty. No, not empty. Devastated. She said she had come from the Order of the Empty Sky. Ethan knew that name. Clarissa had been intercepting their signals. A cult. They believed the others were a purification, that the rift was God's will, that the enchanters were a sin, that the world must be cleansed. They handed people over to the others, voluntarily. They called it a gift. Ethan looked at Naomi, at the symbols on her arms, at her white robe, at her bare feet. He asked if she was from them or with them. Naomi said she was from them. She said she'd run away. That they wanted to give her away, to make her a gift, that she'd been running for 3 days, that she'd heard the Ark's signal. Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he asked what she liked to eat. Naomi froze. She looked at him, as if no one had ever asked her that question before. Ever. She said she didn't know. Ethan said that in that case, they'd try everything they had, and she could choose. He led her inside. Minju fed her. Naomi ate slowly, carefully, as if she couldn't believe the food was real. Then she asked to sit next to Mochi. Ethan said it was okay. Naomi sat on the floor in the store next to Mochi. She placed her hand on the shell. Mochi didn't move a muscle. Naomi sat like that for an hour. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat next to the turtle and breathed. Lily came over. She looked at Naomi. Then she sat down next to her, silently, two girls. One was 6. The other was 20. Both had lost everything. Both had found a turtle. Ethan watched them from behind the counter and made a note in his log. Day 50, new crew member, Naomi Cho, a refugee from the Order of the Empty Sky. Position, undetermined. Status, human. That's enough. That evening, Ethan climbed up to the watchtower. Yu-Jin was there. She was always there in the evenings. He sat down next to her. Jin didn't turn around. She was looking at the horizon through her scope. Ethan asked what she saw. Yu-Jin said nothing, that the horizon was clear, that this was bad. Ethan asked why a clear horizon was bad. Yu-Jin said that when it's quiet, it means someone is waiting. Ethan thought about it. She was right. The scavengers had been silent for 3 weeks. The pyramid had sent an embassy and had also fallen silent. The order that Naomi had fled from was somewhere nearby. 3 forces. 3 silences. This wasn't peace. It was a pause. He looked at the crack in the sky. It was glowing, brighter than before, or so it seemed to him. Mochi stirred inside his head. She said the crack was growing, that the others were getting bigger, that it wouldn't stop on its own. Ethan asked what that meant. Mochi was silent for a moment. Then she said that a long time ago, someone had sealed a crack like this. Ethan asked who. Mochi said she didn't remember, but she remembered that he looked like Ethan. Ethan looked at the turtle, at the crack in the sky, at the crack in the shell, patched with a Chinese Band-Aid. 2 cracks. He thought it wasn't a coincidence. But he didn't ask, not now. Right now, he's been in the apocalypse for 50 days. 6 buildings inside the shell. A crew of 5 women, 1 child, and 1 cat. 3 enemies on the horizon, 1,000 people who know his name, and a turtle that remembers something about the past world. He wrote it down in his log. Day 50, results of the first phase. The Ark is alive. The Ark is growing. The Ark is trapped. Next phase, become indispensable, or become big enough that no one can replace it. Forecast, a storm. Coming soon. The storm came on the 53rd day. Not a weather storm, a human one. Clarissa intercepted the scavengers' communications at 4 in the morning. Kim Jae-wook has joined forces with the pyramid, not as an ally, as a mercenary. Marcus Reed paid him with coastal territory in exchange for a single mission: capture Mochi or destroy the Ark. His choice. Clarissa decoded the coordinates. The scavengers set out in a convoy, 12 motorcycles, 2 trucks, 30 people. Jay Wook at the head, a raven on his shoulder, estimated time to the Ark, 16 hours. Ethan sat in the bus and looked at the map. 16 hours. At Mochi's speed of 20 kilometers per hour, in 16 hours he would travel 320 kilometers. But where to? The coast is to the left, the mountains are to the right, Portland and the Pyramid Territory to the south, Seattle and the ruins to the north. He's trapped. Just as he predicted, Hannah walked in. She looked at him. She said she could tell by the look on his face that the news was bad. Ethan said the scavengers were coming. 30 people. 16 hours. Hannah sat down. She was silent for a moment. Then she said they had 16 hours, 5 women and 1 turtle, and that she'd seen worse situations. Ethan looked at her. He asked when. Hannah said every Friday night in the Detroit ER. Ethan almost smiled. He called a meeting, a quick one, 5 minutes. Yujin said she could take out Jae-wook from the tower if he was in her line of sight, with a single shot. Ethan said that Jae-wook was a spellcaster, and that his raven most likely served as an early warning system. Yujin said she'd take out the raven then. Ethan thought for a moment. Clarissa said she could jam their communications. If they set the transmitter to full power, no signal would get through within a 5-kilometer radius. The scavengers would lose their coordination. Minju said she didn't know how to shoot, but could boil water. Everyone looked at her. Minju said that 20 liters of boiling water dropped from a height of 10 meters was a serious weapon. Hannah looked at her with newfound respect. Naomi remained silent throughout the council meeting. Then she quietly said that she knew how the others hunted, that in the order she'd been taught summoning rituals, that if they could lure the others to the battlefield, the scavengers wouldn't have time to go after the Ark. Everyone fell silent. Ethan looked at her. He asked if she could summon the others on purpose. Naomi said she could, that it wasn't magic, that the others react to certain sound frequencies, that the Order used this for sacrifices, that she hated this knowledge, but that it was useful. Ethan nodded. He said the plan was as follows. They didn't run. They stopped. Ethan chose a position, a hill on the coast. On one side, a cliff dropping to the ocean. On the other, an open field. One road, one direction of attack. He positioned Mochi at the top. Yujin's turret jutted 10 meters. The view was perfect. Ethan spent 14 hours preparing the position. He wasn't building a defense. He was setting a trap, an engineering trap, a logistical one. At his command, Mochi rolled the bakery out to the foot of the hill. The doors were open. The lights were on. The smell of bread, bait. Anyone walking along the road would see the building lit up, warm, unprotected, too obvious. But Ethan knew people, not from experience in war, from experience in retail. People are drawn to light. People are drawn to the smell of food, even if they know it might be a trap, especially if they're hungry. The scavengers were hungry. Marcus Reed paid them with territory, not food. They showed up at dawn on the 54th day. 12 motorcycles, 2 trucks. The convoy stretched out along the road. Yujin saw them from the watchtower 3 kilometers away. She reported it. Ethan stood in the bus and listened. His hands didn't shake. He was surprised by that. Maybe because this wasn't a battle. It was a logistical operation, moving objects through space. He knew how to do that. Clarissa activated the jammer. The Podolshchik's radios fell silent. The convoy slowed down. It lost its coordination. The motorcycles began to spread out. The trucks fell behind. Jae-wook was riding ahead. A raven perched on his shoulder. He saw the bakery. He stopped. He got off his motorcycle. He stood there and watched. Ethan watched through the hospital window. Jae-wook was smart. He knew it was a trap, but he didn't know what kind. He sent 3 men ahead. Reconnaissance. The 3 approached the bakery. They went inside. Ethan waited. The 3 came out. They gave the signal. Clear. Jae-wook moved forward. He brought the rest of the team. They surrounded the bakery. They began searching. They looked for an entrance to the shell. They didn't find one, because there wasn't one. The bakery was just a bakery, protruding outward, disconnected from the shell, an empty room. Ethan watched as 30 scavengers milled about the empty building below. Then he said 2 words to Mochi. "Take it back." Mochi pulled the bakery back in. Instantly, the 30 people who had been standing inside and around the building found themselves on bare ground. The building had vanished. They stood there, bewildered, 2 seconds. That was enough. Naomi turned on the sound, a small speaker connected to a frequency she had calculated, a low hum, almost inaudible to humans, but the others could hear it from kilometers away. They came out of the forest, not a pack, a wave, dozens of small others, pale, eyeless, swift. They surged out from behind the trees on all sides. The scavengers were fighters. They knew how to fight. But they had been preparing to storm the fortress, not to fend off the others in an open field. The first 5 minutes were chaos. Gunshots, screams, the creatures' roars. Yujin fired from the watchtower, not at people, at the others who were getting too close to the fortress. She didn't want to kill the scavengers. Ethan hadn't asked her to. She'd decided on her own. Ethan stood in the bus, controlling Mochi. The fortress moved slowly. It rolled down the hill, past the battlefield, past the scavengers who were fighting the others, past Jaewook, who stood in the midst of the chaos, shouting orders that no one heard because Clarissa was drowning out everything. The raven on his shoulder took flight, a black dot in the gray sky. It circled over the field, searching for Ethan, searching for Mochi. Mochi raised her head. She looked at the raven. The voice in her head was calm, very calm. She said she didn't like it when people hurt her people. She opened her mouth. The raven vanished. Just vanished. The black dot in the sky was there one moment and gone the next. Jaewook froze in the middle of the battle, in the midst of the chaos. He froze and looked up to where his raven had been, his spirit beast, his strength. Nothing. Mochi closed her mouth. Ethan looked at Jaewook through the window. Their eyes met from a distance of 100 meters. Ethan said nothing. He simply turned around and led the fortress away. Mochi moved steadily, 20 kilometers per hour. The battlefield remained behind them. The sounds were fading. Yujin came down from the watchtower. Her face was calm. Her hands didn't tremble. She said that no one had been killed. Ethan nodded. Hannah stood in the hospital doorway. She said that no patients had been harmed. Minju came out of the bakery. She said the bread hadn't burned. Clarissa turned off the jammer. Naomi turned off the speaker. Lily was sitting in the doctor's office, drawing. She drew a turtle eating a crow. Ethan looked at the drawing and said it was artistically accurate. He wrote it down in the log, day 54. Operation Bread Trap, result. The scavengers were neutralized with no casualties on our side. Jaewook's spiritual beast was consumed by Mochi. Jaewook's status, powerless. Arc status, unharmed. Consumables, 1 speaker. Mochi's mood, satisfied. Grapes were issued in double the usual amount. After Jaewook's fall, the world truly learned about the Ark. Clarissa intercepted 12 different broadcasts over the course of a week that mentioned a turtle that had eaten a crow. Rumors spread faster than Ethan could control them. Some said there was a city inside the Ark. Others said Ethan was a new kind of summoner lord. Still others said the turtle was an ancient creature that had come through a crack in the sky. The latter was closer to the truth than anyone realized, but Ethan didn't know that yet. Mochi remained silent. From the day she ate Jaewook the raven, she had changed. She had become quieter, more pensive. Sometimes Ethan sensed through their bond that she was having dreams. Not his dreams. Her own. She saw a city, a large one, on a shell. Thousands of people, walls, towers, gardens, and then fire, and a crack, and a fall. She would wake up and remain silent. Ethan didn't press her, but he took notes. The capacity grew. By the 60th day, Mochi could hold 8 buildings. By the 70th, 10. The people inside the Ark were multiplying. 12 of Hannah's patients had recovered. 8 of them remained. 4 went back to their families. Ethan gave them medicine for the journey and Soyan's coordinates in case they needed a refuge. 9 more people joined them over the course of a month. A farmer and his family, 2 mechanics, a teacher with 3 students, a former firefighter. The Ark had become a small settlement. 31 people. Ethan looked at the list of names in the journal and thought that 3 months ago he had lived alone with his cat and considered that normal. On the 75th day, Mochi spoke. Not as usual, not in short phrases. She woke Ethan up in the middle of the night. The voice in his head was different, deep, ancient. She said she had to tell him. Ethan sat up on his bunk. He listened. Mochi told him, not with words, with images. He saw it, the world 800 years ago, different and yet the same. Different cities, different people, the same crack in the sky, the same others, and a turtle. Huge, as big as a city block. A city stood on its shell, a real city, with houses, with people, with gardens and fountains, the guardian. That's what they called her. A man stood beside her. Ethan saw him only vaguely, a blurred silhouette, but his posture, the tilt of his head, the habit of crossing his arms. He looked like Ethan, or perhaps Ethan looked like him. The man and the guardian were sealing the crack, not with weapons, with construction. They filled the crack with their own bodies. The city on the shell slid into the fissure like a cork into the neck of a bottle. It closed the hole. The people inside the city survived. They made it to the other side. They started over, but the guardian cracked. Her shell split under the strain. She shrank. She contracted. She fell asleep. For 800 years, the man beside her died. Not from his wounds. From having given everything he had. Mocha fell silent. Ethan sat in the darkness and breathed. Then he asked one thing. He asked what that man's name was. Mochi said the name. Ethan didn't hear it. Or maybe he heard it, but didn't believe it. The name sounded like his last name spoken in a language that no longer exists. He asked if that was why she'd chosen him at the pet store. Mochi said she'd been looking for him 800 years by the scent of blood through a bloodline that stretched across the centuries. She found him, the last one. Ethan asked, "The last what?" Mochi said, "The last descendant." Ethan sat there in silence. Then he asked quietly, "Are you afraid he'll follow in that man's footsteps?" Mochi didn't answer with words. She began to cry. Ethan didn't know that turtles could cry. But he felt it through their bond, warm, salty, an ancient sorrow that had lasted 800 years. He placed his hand on her shell. He said he wasn't going anywhere. Mochi said that the other one had said the same thing. Ethan said he wasn't that guy, that he was a warehouse manager from Seattle with a mortgage and a mean cat, that he had neither a heroic past nor a grand destiny, that he was just a guy who was good at counting boxes. Mochi fell silent. Then she said quietly that the other one had described himself that way too. Ethan didn't know what to say. He lay back down. The Countess climbed onto his chest. He lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man who 800 years ago had sealed the crack in the sky and died, and about the turtle that had waited 800 years for him, and about how the world was demanding the same of him, and about how he wasn't ready. He fell asleep toward morning. Mocha hadn't slept. She watched him through the walls of his shell. At his face, at the shadow of another face, she remembered, and she was afraid, very afraid. In the morning, Ethan got up, he washed his face. He made coffee. He found Hannah at the hospital. He told her everything. Hannah listened in silence. Then she asked what he was going to do. Ethan said he was going to close the crack. Hannah asked how. Ethan said he didn't know yet, but that he was an engineer. That an engineer doesn't solve a problem until he's studied the system. That he needed data. That he needed to know how the crack was structured, what it was made of, what its parameters are. Hannah looked at him. She said he was talking about the end of the world, as if it were a malfunction in a warehouse. Ethan said that every malfunction has a cause and a solution, that the difference between a broken conveyor belt and a hole in the sky is only a matter of scale. Hannah said he was either a genius or an idiot. Ethan said that in his experience, it's usually one and the same. Project Roof was conceived on a napkin in a bakery. Ethan was drawing a diagram. Clarissa sat across from him, making corrections. Naomi sat next to Mochi, quietly translating what Mochi was recalling about the past rift. 3 sources of information: Ethan's engineering logic, Clarissa's signal physics, Mochi's memories, filtered through Naomi's knowledge of the nature of the others, which she had acquired in the order. A crack isn't a hole. It's a rupture in the world's supporting structure, like a crack in a building's wall. If a wall cracks, there are 2 things you can do: demolish the building or fill the crack with something that can bear the load. Ethan's ancestor filled the crack with a city, an entire city on the keeper's armor. The city became a plug. The world held firm. But the plug wasn't permanent. After 800 years, it dried out. The crack opened up again. Ethan looked at the diagram. He said that the plug was a temporary solution, a crutch. The real solution was to restore the supporting structure. Clarissa asked how to restore the world's supporting structure. Ethan said it was the same way you restore a load-bearing wall in a building: reinforcement, concrete pour, bonding. You need a material that will bind the edges of the crack and become part of the wall, not a plug, a joint. Clarissa said it was a beautiful metaphor, but that the world wasn't a building. Ethan said that the world was, in fact, a building, with a foundation, with load-bearing walls, with loads, just on a different scale. But the principles were the same. Clarissa looked at him, then at Naomi. Naomi said quietly that Mochi agreed, that the world is a structure, that the keepers have always known this. Ethan asked Mochi what was needed for the seam. Mochi thought for a long time. Then she said that she needed to grow, to become her former self, to become a keeper, and then she would be able not to plug the crack, but to sew it shut. Her shell is the material from which the walls of the world. If she presses herself against the crack and gives up a part of her shell, the edges will fuse together. Ethan asked what she meant by giving up a part of her shell. Mochi said that the buildings inside her would become the seam. They would fill the crack forever. Ethan understood. The buildings she had consumed would become the material to repair the world. A store, a pharmacy, a hospital, a bakery, everything. Everything he had collected, everything he had built. This isn't a home. These are spare parts for the world. He sat there, staring at the diagram on the napkin. Then he asked quietly, "What about the people?" Mochi said that the people would get out, that she would let everyone out before she reached the crack, that no one would be left inside, only buildings, only stones and walls and roofs that would become the seam. Ethan exhaled. He asked, "What about her?" Mochi paused. She said she didn't know. That last time the keeper had survived. She'd shrunk, she'd cracked, she'd fallen asleep. But she'd survived. Maybe this time too. Ethan heard that. Maybe. It weighed more than all the buildings in the shell combined. For Mochi to grow to the keeper's size, she would have to eat a lot. A great deal. Her capacity would have to increase from 10 to 100, maybe more. Ethan did the math. At her current growth rate, that would take 2 years. They didn't have 2 years. The crack was growing. The others were getting bigger every month. Clarissa was recording an increase in their activity. Naomi said that the order sensed the approach of something they called the second hour. If the rift expanded to a critical size, something would crawl out of it that no one could handle. Ethan needed to speed up the growth. Mochi said she grew from the sense of security the people inside felt. The more people who feel at home, the faster it grows. Ethan understood. He needed to do more than just assemble buildings. He needed to bring people together and make them feel at home, not in a shelter, not in a refuge. At home. That's different. He knew the difference. At the Costco warehouse, people worked because they were paid. At the Ark, people stayed because they wanted to. One creates a system, the other creates a home. He needed the latter. On a citywide scale, Ethan sent a message to Marcus Reed through Clarissa in plain text, unencrypted. He said he wanted to meet, not as an enemy, not as a supplicant, as an engineer with a project. Marcus replied a day later. He agreed. They met on neutral ground, an abandoned gas station between the Ark and the pyramid. Marcus Reed turned out to be not what Ethan had expected. Tall, gray-haired, around 50, calm, not angry, tired. His spirit animal was a large gray owl perched on his shoulder, staring with yellow eyes. Marcus said that Ethan had killed his mercenary. Ethan said that Jaywook had asked for it. Marcus said that was true. He paused. Then he asked why Ethan had wanted to meet. Ethan explained about the rift, about Mochi, about Project Roof, about how the world could be fixed, but that it would require resources the Ark doesn't have. Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt. When Ethan finished, Marcus was silent for a minute. Then he said that Ethan was either the smartest person he'd ever met or the most dangerous. Ethan said he was a warehouse manager. Marcus said he knew. That he'd done some digging, that he knew about Costco, the mortgage, and the cat. Ethan asked how. Marcus smiled and said he had 1,000 people, and some of them knew how to find information. Then he grew serious. He said that if Ethan was right and the crack could be sealed, then the pyramid would help, not out of altruism, out of self-interest. A dead world is bad for business. Even for the Lord's business. Ethan accepted this. He understood pure self-interest better than pure altruism. Year 2. The Ark became a city, not metaphorically, literally. By the end of the first year, Mochi's capacity had reached 25 buildings. By the middle of the second year, 50. Ethan thought it was impossible. Mochi said she was remembering how to be big. Each new building was like a restored fragment of memory. A school. A farm, yes. A farm. Ethan argued with Mochi about hydroponics for 3 days. Mochi said that plants inside the shell would grow by different rules. Ethan said that plants obey biology, not magic. Mochi said that inside her, biology and magic were one and the same. Ethan lost the argument. The farm inside the shell yielded a harvest in 2 weeks instead of 2 months. He wrote this down in his log, noting that his degree in logistics didn't cover the ins and outs of magical agriculture. Minju was thrilled. She got fresh vegetables. Real ones, not canned. The first salad in the Ark sparked a reaction that Ethan could only describe as mass euphoria. The observatory appeared in the 10th month. Clarissa found a small astronomical station in the mountains, abandoned with a telescope and equipment. Mochi devoured it. Clarissa connected the telescope to her systems. She aimed it at the rift. For the first time, they saw it up close. The rift wasn't empty. Something was moving inside. Structures, shapes, as if there were another world on the other side, or the ruins of another world. Naomi looked through the telescope and said quietly that she could see a city. Ethan looked. He saw it too. A city on a shell. A city that had become a traffic jam 800 years ago. It was still there, suspended in the rift, destroyed, but not gone. Mochi said it was her former city. Ethan asked if people were still alive there. Mochi said she didn't know. That too much time had passed. Ethan made a note, then he crossed it out. Then he wrote it down again. If people remained in the fissure, if they'd been living inside the seam for 800 years, if Project Roof worked, maybe they could be rescued. He added that to the plan. Clarissa said he was crazy. Ethan agreed. The pyramid provided resources, people, materials, information. Marcus Reed kept his word, not out of kindness, out of calculation, but the calculation worked. Ethan coordinated. The Ark moved along the entire coastline, gathering buildings, gathering people. By the end of the second year, 112 people were living inside the shell. The school was operating. The farm was operating. The hospital had expanded to 3 stories. The bakery had turned into a full-fledged restaurant. Minju ran the kitchen with 8 chefs. Hannah ran the medical wing. Eugene commanded the security detail, 5 marksmen she had trained herself. Clarissa maintained contact with 14 groups of survivors along the entire coast. Naomi became Mochi's interpreter. She understood the turtle better than anyone, even better than Ethan. She would sit with Mochi for hours, listening to her dreams. She drew them in the notebook Ethan had given her. Every drawing, a window with a light shining through. Mochi remembered her real name toward the end of the 2nd year. She told it to Ethan one night, quietly, like a secret. The name was long, in a language that no longer exists. Ethan couldn't pronounce it. He tried 3 times. Mochi sighed inwardly. She said that Mochi was a good name too. Ethan said that she would always be Mochi, no matter how big she grew. Mochi said that was the first thing that man had said to her 800 years ago, that no matter how big she grew, she would always be his. Ethan remained silent. The Countess was sleeping at his feet. She was already 15. She moved more slowly. She slept more. Ethan tried not to think about it. Mochi said that the Countess was happy, that she could feel it, that the cat considered the shell the best place she'd ever lived. Ethan stroked the Countess. She purred. He closed his eyes. In a month, the crack would reach a critical size. Clarissa had calculated it. In a month, something would begin to seep out of it that the world could not survive. In a month, Project Roof must be completed. Mochi must be ready. Ethan must be ready. Everyone must be ready. 1 month, 30 days. Ethan opened his journal. He wrote, final countdown, 30 days. Assets, 68 buildings, 112 people, 1 turtle, 1 crack in the sky, 1 plan, forecast. He didn't finish writing. He closed the journal. He placed his hand on the shell. Mochi was warm, almost hot. She was growing every day, every hour. She was remembering how to be the keeper, and Ethan could feel it, like a vibration, like a hum, like the world's heartbeat, growing louder and louder. The last day of Project Roof was just like any other Tuesday. Minju baked bread in the morning. Hannah made her rounds to check on the patients. Eugene climbed up to the watchtower. Clarissa checked the frequencies. Naomi sat with Mochi on the windowsill and drew. Lily was 8 years old. She'd grown so much in 2 years. She wasn't silent anymore. She laughed a lot. She went to school inside her shell and was the best student. She still drew turtles. In every drawing, there were little windows with lights shining through them. The Countess slept on the windowsill at the hospital. She was almost 16. She hardly moved at all. But she purred. She was always purring. Ethan stood on the bus and looked at the dashboard. Today. He knew it was today. Mochi knew. Everyone knew. Mochi had grown. Over the past month, she had been growing every day. On the outside, the shell was the size of a 5-story building. She moved more slowly, more heavily, but more confidently. Inside it were 74 buildings, a city. A real little city with streets and courtyards and gardens that Minju had planted with flowers because she said that a city without flowers isn't a city but a warehouse. Ethan didn't argue. She was right. The crack in the sky was visible to the naked eye. Wider than on the first day, brighter. Something dark was dripping from it, not liquid, something else. Mochi said it was the shadow of what was coming. That if the crack widened by another meter, the threshold would be crossed, and then nothing would help. Ethan gathered his final council. Everyone, 112 people, in the school's main hall inside the shell. He stood before them, the warehouse manager, before the people who had become his people. He laid out the plan. Mochi would approach the crack from above, from the nearest high ground. It will expand to its maximum size. It will press against the crack. The buildings inside will become the seam. They'll fill the gap. The edges will fuse together. But for that to happen, everyone must get out. Every single one of them. Mochi would let everyone out. Then she would close the armor, and she would go to the crack alone. The room was silent. Minju was crying quietly. Hannah stood by the wall, clenching her fists. Jin sat motionless. Her face was like a mask, but Ethan could see that she was gripping the armrest of her chair so tightly that her knuckles were white. Clarissa kept taking her glasses off and putting them back on. Naomi sat on the floor next to Mochi and kept her hand on the shell. Lily raised her hand. Ethan nodded at her. Lily asked if Mochi would come back, and Than looked at Mochi. Mochi looked at Lily. The voice in Ethan's head was warm. Mochi said she'd try. They climbed Mount Hood, the final ascent. Mochi moved slowly, with difficulty. The shell creaked. Ethan walked beside her, on foot. Everyone was walking. 112 people were climbing the mountain alongside a giant turtle. Not a single one remained in the valley. Not a single one. Marcus Reed had sent people. They stood below and watched. At the summit, the wind was strong, a crack overhead. Close by, Ethan could see its edges. Ragged, pulsating, inside the crack, he saw the ruins of a city. Mochi's city. 800 years in the crack. He turned to his men. He said it was time to leave. Mochi would open its shell. Everyone would get out. He would be the last to leave. Hannah walked up to him. She looked. She said that if he tried to stay inside, she would personally drag him out by the scruff of his neck. Ethan said he wasn't going to. Hannah said she knew that, but just in case. For the first time in 2 years, she hugged him, briefly, tightly. She let go, turned away, walked toward the exit. Eugen approached. Silently, she held out her hand. Ethan shook it. She didn't let go right away. She held it for 3 seconds. Then she let go and walked away. Minju ran up. She didn't hug him. She shoved something wrapped in a cloth into his hand. A piece of bread, warm, fresh. She told him to eat it later. Later, when it was all over. Ethan nodded. Clarissa approached. She adjusted her glasses. She said that if he broke her antenna, she'd kill him. Ethan said he'd try not to break it. Naomi was the last to approach. She didn't speak. She took a drawing out of her notebook. She held it out to him. A turtle with little windows. Lights were on in all the windows, and next to the turtle stood a little person, and he's holding its paw. Ethan took the drawing. He looked at Naomi. She nodded. She walked away. Lily ran up last. She hugged his leg tightly. She didn't cry. She was brave. She always was. Ethan patted her on the head. He said it would be soon. Lily let go of his leg. She walked over to Hannah. Hannah took her by the hand. Everyone went outside. 112 people stood on the hill and looked at the shell. Ethan stood inside alone. One last patrol. He walked through the store, the shelves, the cash register, that very same screen that lit up on the first day, the pharmacy, white walls, the smell of antiseptic, a hospital. Beds, windows, a bakery, ovens, flour on the shelves, the smell of bread that will never fade, a school, desks, a blackboard with Lily written in chalk, a farm, greenery, light, an observatory, a telescope pointed at the crack, a bus, the steering wheel, the seat where Lily had sat on the first day, a tower, a platform, a support for his left hand. Ethan climbed the tower. For the last time, he looked around, the world below, mountains, forests, the ocean in the distance, a crack in the sky, people on the mountain, his people. He climbed down. He walked over to Mochi. He placed both hands on her shell. She was hot, almost scorching. He told her she was smart. The very best turtle in all worlds and all cycles. Mochi said he wasn't half bad either. For a warehouse manager. Ethan laughed. Then he asked seriously if she would survive. Mochi was silent for a moment. Then she said that she'd survived last time, that she'd cracked, shrunk, fallen asleep, but she'd survived. She said it would be better this time, because this time the seam wouldn't be a plug, but a real seam. Because the buildings inside her weren't just walls. They were a home where people were happy, and walls steeped in happiness hold better than walls steeped in sacrifice. Ethan stood there listening and realized that the turtle had taught him more in 2 years than 4 years of college. He kissed her shell. Mochi sighed inwardly. She said it tickled. Ethan went outside. Last, Mochi closed her shell. She began to grow. Quickly, as if she'd been holding herself back for the entire 2 years, and had finally let go. The shell expanded. 2 stories, 3, 5, 10. The people on the mountain were retreating. Mochi was growing She rose up. She stood on her hind legs. With her front legs, she reached toward the crack. Ethan watched from below. He saw the shell, the size of a city block, touch the edge of the crack. He saw light pour out of the shell. Warm, golden, light from the windows. From all the windows at once. A store, a pharmacy, a hospital, a bakery, a school, a farm, an observatory. 74 buildings glowed from within, and their light flooded the crack. Mochi pressed herself against the fissure. The shell melted. No, it didn't melt. It flowed in like cement into a mold. One by one, the buildings filled the crack. They became part of it. A seam, a real one, not a plug. A seam made of houses where people were happy. Ethan stood and watched. Hannah stood beside him. Eugene, Minju, Clarissa, Naomi, Lily, everyone. The crack was narrowing, slowly, edge by edge. The light from the windows pulsed. Ethan saw figures emerging from the depths of the crack. People, dozens, hundreds, people from the old city, the city that had hung in the seam for 800 years. They were alive. They were coming out of the crack onto the mountain, pale, astonished, alive. Naomi was the first to run toward them. Then Hannah, then everyone. The crack closed, quietly, without an explosion. Without thunder, the edges came together, the seam glowed and then went out. The sky became just the sky, gray, ordinary, without a crack. For the first time in 2 years, Mochi, Ethan looked up. Where the crack had been, there was nothing, only the sky. He called out to her, out loud, in his mind, Mochi. Silence. 5 seconds, 10, 20. Nothing. Ethan stood on the mountain, looking up at the sky and calling out to the turtle who had found him at the pet store for $8. Hannah walked over. She put her hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. Lily took his hand. A minute, 2. Ethan stood there and looked. Then he heard it, quietly, barely audible, a voice in his head, tired, ancient, familiar. The voice said she needed grapes. Ethan looked down. A turtle was sitting on the grass at his feet, the size of his palm, white on the underside, round, with a crack in its shell patched with a Chinese Band-Aid. It was looking up at him, just like it had looked at him in the pet store, just like it had looked at him on the first day. It was small, tiny. All the buildings were gone. The whole city was gone. All the power was gone. All that remained was a palm-sized turtle. Who wanted grapes? Ethan sat down on the ground. He picked her up. She was light, warm, alive. He pressed her to his chest. Mochi sighed in her mind. She said it tickled. Ethan was laughing and crying at the same time. Lily sat down next to him. Hannah sat down next to him. Eugene walked over and sat down silently. Minju ran over. Clarissa, Naomi. They sat on the mountain around a man holding a little turtle. The sky above them was clear, for the first time in 2 years. The others below froze. They stopped. They fell. Without the crack, they were cut off from the source. One by one, they crumbled, like sand, like dust, like a dream that ends. Ethan sat on the mountain and held Mochi. She was small, but alive. The shell was empty, not a single building inside. She had given everything away. Everything had become a seam. The store where Lily smiled for the first time. The pharmacy where Hannah breathed out for the first time. The hospital where Ethan first realized he couldn't just walk by. The bakery where Minju cried with happiness. The tower where Eugene first felt that she wasn't a weapon. The school where Lily wrote with chalk on the blackboard. The farm where Ethan lost a bet about hydroponics. The observatory where Naomi first saw the stars without a crack. It's all gone. Everything became part of the world. Walls saturated with happiness, the strongest material in the world. Minju took a thermos out of her backpack. She poured some tea. She handed it to Ethan. Ethan took it. He took a sip. The tea was bad, but hot. Minju said that tomorrow they'd find a new bakery. Hannah said that tomorrow she'd find a new hospital. Clarissa said that tomorrow she'd put together a new antenna. Eugene didn't say anything. She just sat closer. Naomi took out a notebook. She started drawing a little turtle on her palm. Lily looked at the drawing and said that next time the turtle would be even bigger. Ethan looked at her, then at Mochi. Mochi opened one eye. A voice in his head said that the capacity was 1. Ethan smiled. He took a piece of bread out of his pocket that Minju had given him. Warm, soft. He broke it in half. He gave half to Lily. He ate the other half himself. He took out his notebook. He opened a blank page. He wrote, Fortress Journal, Volume 2, Day 1, Assets, 1 palm-sized turtle, 6 women, 1 child, 1 very old cat down at the foot of the mountain in a carrier under the watchful eye of a former firefighter, 1 clear sky, 0 buildings, forecast, starting over. We have bread.